In 1988, November 12th, there was an air show at Norton Air Force Base, which has since been closed. It's in San Bernardino, California. They had an annual open house and air show, and they'd have all these aircraft that would fly in from different parts of the country. They'd have static displays, and as an aviation artist, this was a terrific opportunity for me to take my camera and go down and take pictures of rivet lines on planes, so that when I did highly detailed illustrations of the different aircraft, that I would have all the features correct. I mean, there are literally people in the aviation art industry and fans of that genre that will literally count the number of rivets on a panel and say, he left out two rivets on that panel right there. So I mean, I even got serial numbers off of missiles and things like that that I would include in the illustrations when I would do them. So that was my main reason for wanting to go to this air show at Norton Air Force Base. And I had a colleague, a friend, who I'll just call Brad for the sake of this discussion. Some people know what his last name is, and I've tried to discontinue using his name, principally because disclosing of his name has brought a lot of unwanted attention to him and his career. I don't know specifically what, if any, or how much harm has come to him in terms of his career because of my disclosures. I have to say that not being a journalist, not having a background in journalism, I didn't really know when I was being prodded by people in the Disclosure Project to name names and things like that, which I did, that this could be potentially and very harmful to the individuals who had been the original source of the material. In the case of Brad and another individual who had occasion to see one of these things up close when he was actually in the service in 1973 at Edwards Air Force Base, there were a lot of details that were not only seen by these individuals, but were also explained to them, and, basically to understand what they were looking at. And so my friend Brad and I were going to go to this air show at Norton Air Force Base, and last minute I got called off to do a couple of illustrations for Popular Science magazine over the weekend. It was about $7,000 worth of illustration work that I couldn't pass up, for such a short amount of time to actually complete the work. So I didn't go to the air show, and Brad went. And about a week or so passed, and I hadn't heard from him. So I called him up, asked him how he liked the air show, and this was a person who was generally very enthusiastic and animated, and he sounded completely different. He sounded like he had been emotionally drained. And so I asked him what was wrong, and he didn't really want to talk about it on the phone. So we went and had lunch together, and he sat across from me and explained to me that he had seen these three flying saucers in a hangar. And initially he made it sound like it had been one of the large hangars. There was a very large Quonset hut style hangar at Norton Air Force Base, facility that's now owned by Lockheed, I believe. These were the sort of Quonset hut style hangars that have sort of the arching roof. Initially it was believed that that was the location where the exhibit occurred, but later on, through a third party that knew both of us, Brad disclosed that he and a number of other officials, a number of people that he had been associated with, and people who were, for example, Alan Cranston, the late state senator from California, the late Congressman George E. Brown Jr., who at the time was the chairman of the Congressional Committee on Space Science and Advanced Technology. These people were all in this group of dignitaries, both military and civilian, that got on a military version of the Boeing 727, and they flew from Norton Air Force Base up to Air Force Plant 42, which is in Palmdale. A lot of people just consider it the Palmdale Airport. It was actually a facility that was built, from what I understand, by Lockheed back in the 1960s. And the hangar that is now serving as a Skunk Works hangar was the original construction site for the L-1011 Lockheed TriStar airliner, which did not prove to be as successful and as durable as the McDonnell Douglas DC-10. So anyway, they disembark from the aircraft, go into the hangar, and the gentleman who was basically serving as a sponsor for Brad to get into the show was one of the top management types from Lockheed Martin, their Skunk Works division. And he seemed surprised at the extent of the exhibit that was there. Over time, I learned that the individual aircraft that were on display were actually, they had a blind that was maybe 9 to 10 feet tall around each of the aircraft, so that while you might be standing next to one particular aircraft in the display, you wouldn't be able to look across the floor of the hangar and see the other aircraft that were there in the hangar at the time. So it was a situation where you would be escorted from one exhibit to the next, and the individual aircraft would be shown to the guests that were there. And so he went through a description of the different aircraft that he saw. He described a number of unusual hovercraft vehicles that were there. There was a kind of an unusual short takeoff and landing or stall type aircraft that had a pair of wings on the fuselage that looked like a stepped series of almost like Venetian blinds with a fence out on the wingtips that held them all together, and the individual wings could all rotate, producing a different angle of attack. But when they were rotated fully upward, the leading and trailing edges would all come together, so that this set of individual wings would actually become a very broad and long sweeping surface. And then just ahead of the very first wing at the top front part of this assembly was a small turbofan engine with a kind of duct. Imagine a funnel that had been squashed and flattened out on the end. The small end was stuck in the back end of the engine. And what this did was it took the exhaust stream from the small turbofan engine and it spread it out over the entire leading edge of the first wing. So basically it was an aircraft that was making the ultimate exploitation of what's called the Coanda effect, where basically you can take like a piece of paper like this, and you blow over the top edge. And if you blow hard enough, it actually produces lift, because the air passing over the top surface of the wing is moving faster, so it produces a lower pressure than beneath the wing, and basically you have lift, massive amount of lift created using this particular design. And then right smack dab down through the middle of the fuselage of the aircraft was the same GAU-8 7-barrel Gatling gun, 30mm Gatling gun that's used in the A-10 Warthog, which is one of the anti-armor ground support type aircraft that has been around for a long time. It was built by Republic Aircraft many years ago. So this thing was like a strange looking version of the A-10 with an unusual wing configuration. It wasn't very fast. Apparently it was quite maneuverable. And so this was one of the aircraft among many that were in this exhibit. There was also I guess there were 2 or 3 different variations of the flying wing aircraft that were part of the Air Force competition to build the B-2 stealth bomber. Lockheed had come up with a version that looked like a large, very ungainly version of the F-117A stealth fighter. Boeing had come up with what ultimately won the I'm sorry, it was Northrop that came up with an aircraft that ultimately wound up winning the B-2 competition, which was the rather elegant B-2 Spirit that we know of today, which had a very beautifully blended wing body design that incorporated the fuselage right into the design of the wing, had a number of features that made it particularly stealthy. Sawtooth trailing edge on the wing, and the inlets for the engines were buried in the upper part of the wing to prevent the rotation of the turbine blades from being exposed to radar and so forth. Anyway, so skipping all the other aircraft that were in the exhibit, the last part of the display involved these three flying saucers, the so-called Alien Reproduction Vehicle, ARV, or they were also nicknamed the Flux liner, F-L-U-X liner. Flux is a term used in electricity to describe a high level of charge, from what I understand. So these aircraft, these Flux liners, were sitting in the hangar, hovering several feet off the floor, with no visible support from above, no landing gear extended below, although I understand from one of the witnesses that I spoke to in 2014 that the more advanced version of this type of propulsion system, which was built into what looked like a black lenticular lens-shaped disc, did have a type of landing gear that would extend from the ventral surface, the underside of the aircraft, and the entire propulsion system would be shut down, and it would be rolled into the hangar using small electric motors that were actually in the drive wheels that made contact with the ground. And this was largely because the electromagnetic field that was produced by this particular more advanced version of the Alien Reproduction Vehicle, it was so powerful that the craft would interact with the metal structure of the hangar and it would raise havoc. So they had to turn the whole thing off and then just basically scoot it in on these little wheels into the hangar.
Well, now, Mark, if I could jump in really quickly, let me try and do a screen share. I have a photo that you drew of this, and hopefully I won't goof it up. Hopefully you guys can see all of this fairly well. Yeah. So this looks like this is the actual hangar, right? That you're describing. Yeah.
That's the inside of the Lockheed Skunk Works hangar. Yeah. And those are the big bypass doors on. There's actually bypass doors on both sides. During the production run on the L-1011, they could actually bring sub-assemblies of the aircraft in on one side, and it went through kind of a production chain where they would attach the wing and the engines and so forth as the aircraft would go through the various stages of their construction. So they had bypass doors that were both on the front and the back side. That would be the east and the west sides of the building, which was located at the west end of the Plant 42 complex.
Okay. Sorry about that.
One of the things that the eyewitness Brad had explained was that the craft, or the three different craft, shared the same kind of proportions in terms of the size of the crew compartment, which what you see there is actually the upper half of a sphere, a composite sphere. There is there's a process that they have. I'm trying to remember what it's called, where they have a mandrel that they begin wetting a composite thread, and they wind it around this mandrel and create a sphere that has all these different windings of a synthetic or a composite, like a carbon fiber or fiberglass type thread, that are wound all through the structure of the sphere, which means that it has an incredible amount of strength. And then, of course, it's heated and cured and so forth. And then they cut an opening into it, and they put in a metal frame and what looks like your old style, Captain Nemo style submarine door, with the pins that go out into the frame of the door, with a sort of a vacuum tight or an airtight seal around the edges, and a big wheel in the middle that you turn to either insert or withdraw the pins from around the edges of the door to withstand the pressure that's either inside or outside of the vehicle. There was also a kind of a blending that was added to the sphere afterwards, and in the way that these craft were constructed, the crew compartment sphere, at least in the smallest version, was actually designed so that the crew compartment sphere was actually split at the belt line around its entire perimeter with a series of explosive bolts. And the flange that flares out at the bottom, you can see this in the largest example, is probably the easiest to see in this illustration. But this flange would actually capture the primary windings, the coils that were in that little flat section that's right at the belt line, the midpoint of the crew compartment. That's where the coils are that are around the outside of this system. And then the various panels that go around the bottom of that skirt there are literally attached using a series of Zeus fasteners on the upper edge, and then along the mating edges that run vertically around the perimeter of the craft, and then there's another set of Zeus fasteners on the bottom.
So you're saying that they could remove, and sorry, I know you can't see my hand, they could actually remove the top then. You're saying there were explosive bolts around the top and you could blow the sphere off? Is that what you're describing?
This was part of the egress system, the ejection system. There's a central column that runs down through the middle of the smallest version of the craft. Now, I'm not sure what the layout was in the larger designs. Let
me click over to this one. I should apologize.
Yeah, that's a computer generated illustration that's not completely accurate in terms of the scale and the proportion of things, but it does show a pretty clear there you go, outline of what the different components are, where they're located. You can see in the cross section over on the right side there where that one panel comes up on the skirt, and there's just a little bit of a cross section of the coils. That, of course, is not correct in terms of the number of layers of coils. There were 16 layers of coils. The coils were a square cross-section copper windings that were 1/4 of an inch across, with a spacing between the coils that was 3/8 of an inch, both top to bottom, side to side. And then there was an additional margin of dielectric material, or this kind of a coarse material that was used in the casting of these things, above and below, probably for wear and tear over the lifetime of the vehicle. But the skirt panels were literally fastened to the outer edge of this ring with the coils in it using Zeus fasteners. But the flange that was visible in that earlier drawing that you had up there, Tim, was actually used to, you can see right there on the largest vehicle, there's kind of a blended flange that comes out on the sides. And that was actually used to trap the coils at the midpoint between the upper and the lower halves of the crew compartment. And that was what held those in place. So the system was designed so that in an ejection sequence, the explosive bolts around the perimeter of the crew compartment would blow off. The top half of the crew compartment in the smallest version would come off, and with it, it would pull the outer sheath on that central column that the ejection seats were all mounted to. And then once this had cleared, yeah, there you go. You can kind of see a pair of rails above each of those ejection seats. And from what I understand, the top half of the crew compartment would come off, and once it was a certain distance away from the rest of the vehicle and something below 18,000 feet, the ejection seats would slide down those rails off of the upper half of that column that's above the rotating disc that also serves as kind of a floor beneath the feet of the pilot.
Yeah. So Mark, if I could jump in, I see, and I should apologize, I can't really see the chat screen. Hopefully nobody is chatting me right now, but it looks, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but underneath each one of these chairs, there is a little square that you've drawn on the floor. So it looks like when this top half of the cylinder comes off, then what you're saying is the chairs would slide down on the rails right out of the bottom of it, and presumably they have parachutes or something attached. Right?
Yeah. Well, these were the standard ACES-2 ejection seats that you find in aircraft like the F-4 Phantom, manufactured by McDonnell Douglas. There was, of course, this drawing is somewhat abbreviated from the cutaway illustration that I did. It was more or less just a line drawing. It didn't have all the shading and coloration that this one here does. The ejection seat actually had a pair of small oxygen tanks that were underneath the lower seat cushion on the ejection seats, and those rails went all the way down to just a section just above where that rotating disc is located. You can also see the controls on the pilot seat there, which looked like a little ball on one side and a big rheostat on the other side that moves forward and backwards, controlling the amount of power, and then the selection of where the power was sent to in the capacitor array in the bottom of the craft was controlled by that ball-like mechanism. Now, it's only been in more recent times that I found that my original visual description of that control mechanism was not correct. That there actually was your typical pilot's control stick, very much like the one that you would see on the F-16, which had a number of buttons and triggers and things on it that would help to activate or deactivate certain features in the propulsion system, or the synthetic vision system that involve the different cameras that are on the outside of the crew compartment. This was basically how they were able to see where they were. It was my understanding that these cameras could be operated individually as a single point of reference for the pilot, or they could, in terms of long-range visualization, pairs of the cameras could be combined and moved in unison so that it basically provided a kind of rudimentary three-dimensional viewing of the exterior of the
Mark, if I could jump in quickly, can I ask what I'd like to ask what the tanks are. I think that Jeremiah Popp had asked about these last time. So you've got green tanks and red, and I realize these have been colorized, but
yeah. Let me expand on that. That was something that for a long time it wasn't very clear exactly what this particular feature was. The original witness thought that they were oxygen tanks, but as it turns out, we were never quite able to figure out what it was that would cause that disc above those cylinders to rotate. And it turned out that just in the last year or so, I've had a very gifted electrical engineer that I've been working with, trying to dissect and sort of back engineer, as it were, how the system functioned. And it turns out that those cylinders actually are a series of induction coils that would impart an electromagnetic field to the underside of this disk, and that was what would cause the disk to spin. Something that I had never considered, and was pleasantly surprised to find out that someone looked at this and recognized almost immediately what it meant, what it was. And so we're actually in the process of constructing some rudimentary tests to try and prove out how this mechanism works and what its function was. But the interesting thing about it is that we believe that that disk was actually being spun up for the purpose of functioning as a homopolar generator. Now, for the people in the audience who don't know what a homopolar generator is, you can look this up on the internet, but there are industrial versions of this kind of device that do not have a disk anywhere near this large in diameter, that are producing upwards of 10,000 volts of electrical charge from the rotating disk in the center of the mechanism. And basically what it does is, in simplest terms, you have a conductive metal disk that's spinning at a certain amount of RPM, and it literally, through centrifugal force, throws the electrons in the material out to the edge where they can be drawn away using a brush-like contact mechanism. And it's my understanding that this was the source for putting the tremendous amount of electrical charge that was used on the capacitor array down in the bottom. There was a three-pronged distribution mechanism that would be at the bottom of the system that rotated around and distributed charge to the different capacitors in three simultaneously acting distribution points that were set 120 degrees apart from one another. And this was in order to, because this thing was using a principle that's often been called the Biefeld-Brown effect, it would allow the even distribution of electrical power to the capacitors so that you wouldn't have an imbalance in the amount of thrust that was being produced by the array on the bottom of the craft. Now, there are a lot of people that have argued in my discussions with them after I've said these things that the Biefeld-Brown effect could never actually lift something off the ground, could never actually achieve the things that Mr. McCandlish has claimed about this particular craft and so forth. But it's only been in the last 4 or 5 years that I actually had a witness that came to me and said that what everyone didn't know was that when you take a bank of capacitors, an array like this, and you boost the charge that is being stored on those capacitor plates to a voltage in excess of 1,250,000 volts, this is a tremendous amount of electrical power, that there is a side effect which basically amounts to a reduction in mass. And the higher the voltage goes, the lower the mass of not only the array, but everything in the surrounding environment out to a certain distance from the array itself. And in fact, the amount of electrical energy that's stored on the array actually has the ability of warping space-time. And this is one of the mechanisms that allows for the tremendous accelerations that have been reported by these kinds of craft, is it literally has the ability to reduce the mass of the vehicle so that these dramatic and instantaneous accelerations. I personally have seen vehicles that use this technology make incredible maneuvers, right angle turns at speeds well in excess of 20,000 miles per hour when measured time to distance. So you know, it's a dramatic technology. It's a lofty claim, but I've seen it with my own eyes. I can tell you that it really does work. It really is. It's true.
Well, Mark, let me put up another view here, and I should apologize if I'm causing trouble with the view screen. I wanted to zoom in. You mentioned the Biefeld-Brown effect, and so I wanted to show this cutaway, and hopefully I'm not driving anybody nuts. This one is not as pretty, not as many colors, but I think it's definitely better. So these would be, hopefully you can see my mouse, on this central column here. These would be what you're describing. Originally, you thought they were oxygen cylinders. Now you think that they're coils to spin up a homopolar generator, which would be right here in the center with a little spike coming up out of it.
Let me stop you right there. That spike is part of something else. The system involves also what amounts to a very large Tesla coil, with the primary windings being in that large array or large set of coils that's around the outside of the crew compartment, and then there's another set of coils that are on the inside of that central column, and then the induction coils, those cylinders that are below the disc that's in the inside there of the craft, would actually be responsible for spinning up the disc. Now,
which cylinders are we talking about, Mark?
The cylinders that are in the black and white drawing that Tim has brought up, these cylinders that are around the base of the larger central column that runs down to the center.
The up and down cylinders, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the vertical cylinders. Yeah, the horizontal cylinders that are down there beneath the skirt and underneath the ventral overhang of the crew compartment. Those are oxygen tanks used as part of the environmental system, or the trying to remember what the technical term is for, but it's the system they use for breathing.
Now, Mark, you'd mentioned the B-field-Brown effect, and one of the reasons I brought this photo up is, so these would be capacitors. And again, I don't know if you could see my cursor, but these would be capacitors at the bottom of the craft for the B-field-Brown effect, right?
Oh yeah, I see your little arrow down there. If you could reduce the size on the image just a little bit, so we can get the whole thing in there.
Sure.
And maybe center it a little bit to the left, because I have all the other participants sort of in windows that are showing up over on the right hand side there.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Is that a little better?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Yeah, the plates that are you can see on the end of the individual capacitor banks. These are all cast into a single large array. And it's my understanding that at the inner end of each of these packs, the plates that are in there were alternating between positive and negative charge in terms of the distribution of electricity in the system, and that 4 of the plates were tied together with one conductive bar, I guess you'd say, and the other 4, so they basically were like this 4 and this 4 were set up so that they basically tied to 2 connectors that plugged into the bottom of this central column, which is where they got their charge from. Now, this drawing was done back in 1989, just a few months after I began getting the information from the original witness, Brad. And so I didn't know anything about the distribution network or system that was set up in the bottom of this vehicle at the time, in terms of how the charge was accumulated, number one, and secondly, how it was sent out to the capacitors. I had no idea, but I know that each of those individual capacitors had a vertically oriented solenoid that would connect them to the power source, depending on what the flight control requirements of the pilot were. So for example, if you wanted the aircraft to fly to your left, you would supply more power over on the right side of the vehicle, and you'd get more thrust and it would tilt. And in a sense, so the control was kind of like the swash plate that controls the angle of pitch on the main rotor of a helicopter. So if you wanted more lift on one side, the swash plate would tilt in a way that would, pivot the axis, the horizontal axis of the main rotor on a helicopter, and it would produce more of a cut into the air, and it would give you more lift. So this system functions sort of in the same way, except that rather than using aerodynamics, you're using a kind of electrodynamic force of some kind. The other thing was that, as I said before, the witness, this more recent witness, told me that these plates were charged up to 1,250,000 volts before you would begin to see this effect where it would cause a reduction in mass of the vehicle and a certain amount of the surrounding space-time and anything in it. Interestingly, and I don't know if you can see this in the detail, but the capacitors, the plates down in each one of these sections were set up in such a way that the plates in one section lined up with the gaps in the adjacent sections. So there was a little bit of staggering where you would have one group of plates here, and then you'd have the other group that would line up with the gaps in between in the adjoining sections. I'm not sure what the purpose behind that was, but I have a sense that it had something to do with a more efficient operation of the system as a whole. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, so let me take it off here. Let me stop screen sharing, and I hope I did okay with that. And again, we'll just take a quick look. I just want to see how our gallery of folks is doing. Does anyone have any questions? Let me see. Chris Lumon actually just sent me. Okay. Chris Lumon said interleaved. You guys are chatting. Let me see. Chris, let me unmute you if I can find you. There we go. Chris had some questions. Oh.
Yeah,
Chris,
I just seem to have lost the feed here. Okay, there we go. I'm back again.
Okay, and yeah, actually Jeremiah had some here. I'll ask Jeremiah to unmute then.
Okay, yeah. So a couple of things. We've been studying and trying to replicate Thomas Townsend Brown's work for quite a while. We've tried parallel plate capacitor experiments based on some papers that we reviewed with positive results. They claimed on parallel plate capacitor experiments with DC, and Mark Sokol is holding up one of those right now. So the size of the plates in each of these and the dielectric spacing is even and symmetrical, and so we didn't observe any force with that system. We tried specifically well insulated and well sealed asymmetrical dielectrics, and we did both DC tests up to about 120,000 volts on some of those, and we also did impulse tests looking for unusual or anomalous effects as a result of the difference in the size of the plates or their surface area versus the electric fields that would be leaving them as a result of an impulse. So what we found is that we did have actually some anomalous effects with the asymmetrical capacitors, but they seem to be very fast transient effects. And not only are they difficult to measure, but they're difficult to reliably reproduce at the same amplitude. And so a variety of test and measurement errors come into play when trying to measure any kind of an impulse, especially a capacitor discharge with a very, very rapid transient like we were looking for. But my question about the ARV is regarding the capacitor plates and the way that the energy that's stored in them is used. If there's a corresponding coil at 90 degrees to those capacitor plates, so you have this magnetic coil that can, I'm guessing, take the energy that's stored in the capacitor and have the capacitor dumped into it. I'm guessing that this would probably be some kind of fast impulse. And I do remember coming across another drawing. I don't think that it was associated with Mark McCandlish at all, but it could be relevant to this, where there was a series of GE spark gaps that were used where they're physically or mechanically actuated to bring terminals closer to each other. And the inside environment is such that they can be discharged frequently and not suffer dramatic degradation as a result of the high impulse currents traveling through them. And so some kind of mechanism associated with the control would, I believe, discharge the capacitor plates into that section. So I guess the first question is regarding the way I described that, Mark. Does that sound like something that you've ever heard from anybody else, or have you ever heard of capacitors discharging into the coils? Would that be maybe something that they were used for?
I have heard that, yes. In fact, one of the solutions that they'd come up with to override or mitigate the degradation from the arcing of electricity from one component to another was that they were immersing the components at the point where the electrical charge jumped back and forth with something called Voltessa oil. Now, I don't know what that is or what it's made of or what its special requirements are, but that was one of the things they had done to mitigate the, I guess what you see is a kind of eroding of the contact points because of the tremendous amount of electricity that's passing through the material in the gap. And that was one of the things that I had been told was used to mitigate that problem. The central column is kind of like a klystron, from what I understand. It used a mercury vapor. Now there are both liquid and gaseous versions of that central column. Now I know people are going to roll their eyes and say, okay, this guy's credibility is.
No, I wanted to hear about this. This makes total sense, and we're having the same conversation. It makes total sense. So please don't be dissuaded. What you're saying here perfectly lines up.
And actually, let me try and put Mark on. Mark, let me see if I can spotlight Mark here.
This is actually a klystron. You're talking about a klystron. This is a klystron from the Berkeley Labs Linear Accelerator. It helped discover two elements, americium and berkelium. And I bought it because we were going to try this exact experiment of impulsing a parallel plate capacitor, bifield Brown effect type of thing. And at first I didn't realize the significance of it. We actually bought two of them, but this was actually a piece of equipment that David Alzafon's dad, Frederick, actually worked on in Berkeley Labs. So it's funny that you mentioned klystrons, because this is one of the most powerful klystrons ever built. It's capable of 186 megawatt impulses for like 5 nanoseconds. So we can get really high power impulses very rapidly into a sample. And we have some equipment coming in the mail that should be here before December. And we're going to be running an array of tests using these klystrons to impulse a parallel plate capacitor. And we hope to see some amazing results with it.
So you're holding a piece of history right there.
A piece of history that we're going to use in the lab, yeah. You can read about it. It's the CX1538. There's actually several papers written about this specific tube. There's only a dozen of them ever made, and you could have bought it on eBay for $50 when they took the thing apart because nobody knew what it was worth.
Now, Mark, a moment ago you were holding up a capacitor that you tested also. I'm wondering if you could hold that up again too, since I have you spotlit.
Oh yeah, so it's pretty heavy. Can't hold it for that long. It's basically a parallel plate capacitor that we use for the T. Townsend Brown, gravitator test. Like Jeremiah mentioned before, there's a lot of ways to make this thing work and get false positives. So until you get rid of the ionic wind effect, you're going to see movement from the wind. And we used an incense stick. I call it the incense stick test. Basically, we attached an incense stick that was lit that provides a very thin column of smoke, and you're able to see if there's any air movement. I even saw movement in this without any air movement, but it turned out it was because I had two incoming leads to the high voltage side, and then you had electrostatic repulsion that was pushing them apart from each other, causing the device to move. So then we had to change the whole test setup, and finally we were able to get it so that it stopped moving. But then we have a team member in Vietnam, Nam Tran, who I don't think he made it on the call because it's middle of the night there. But he kept on trying experiments with T. Townsend Brown, and he kept on getting results. And he would send over his capacitors to us. We tested them here. We didn't get results. And then we started looking into his power supply. And I want Jeremiah to get on this because this was an interesting conversation that we had in the middle of the night once, when we realized that the reason why he was getting results was because his power supply was not putting out a clean DC signal. It was actually, he built a power supply wrong. He made several mistakes in it.
Wrong by what we would consider engineering standards of voltage multiplier. A few fundamentals were broken, like making sure that you ground the side opposite the transformer so that your capacitors can rapidly discharge instead of discharging through the secondary coil of the transformer and causing a fat voltage impulse. But what we discovered is that based on how we calculated it out, instead of getting a pure 50 kV DC, what he would have ended up with is a modulated 50 kV DC with a 7 kV, roughly 22 kilohertz signal riding on top of it. So you would have this very fast modulated signal already biased by some amount of voltage. And I think as a result of that, he was receiving some interesting or anomalous effects. And what we were really questioning was, is it an ionic effect? Or is it an attraction effect the way he has a scale set up? Or could it possibly be, sorry about that, or could it possibly be something different entirely? So we tested a variety of different things. We found that if the scale is placed on the table and the sample is placed on something suspending it away from the scale, that we can receive results or positive measurements or negative measurements of weight loss depending on polarity. But the farther that we get the sample away from the table, say like we use a toilet paper tube or something to separate it 6 inches, or we use a paper towel tube to separate it 12 inches, we get a different measurement on the scale based on how far away the sample is from the table. And even in cases where we can't detect any ionization, there appears to be an effect with the nearby surfaces. This is in concert with what Townsend Brown said in his laboratory notes, wherein he stated that the test sample would actually exert a force opposite of its direction of acceleration on the walls of the inside of the vacuum chamber. So I was wondering if you thought it could be ionic, I guess would be a good question. Do you think there could be some ionic component traveling outside the craft that would add to the propulsion system?
Well, I honestly don't know the answer to that. I imagine that anytime you have that amount of electricity stored in a system, that you're going to see ionization occurring around the vehicle. I mean, in the dozens of different sightings that I've had of craft using the technology over the years, I can tell you in almost every single instance where these things were seen at night, there was a very large amount of ionization that would surround the vehicles and would follow behind them like a comet tail that would move in unison with them, and it would sort of fizzle out the further away it got from the original craft as it was moving across the sky. And the faster that it would move, the longer that trail of ionization would be. I've seen craft moving, as I said before, in excess of 20,000 miles an hour when you measure time to distance from one point to another on a map. And without a sonic boom, I might add, which was stunning to see, because I've been around aircraft capable of supersonic speeds ever since I was a little kid. My dad was an Air Force veteran. And so to see something cover 7 miles of airspace in about a second and a half, in the middle of the night, leaving this tremendous trail. I mean, it was like as it moved across the sky, there was this white streak that followed it, and it was sort of moving in unison with us, which was kind of spooky because it would delineate the flight path as it was going. And when it would make a right angle turn, there'd be a right angle turn in the trail of ionization that was left behind. It was really fascinating to see. But yes, there is ionization, especially when it's in the atmosphere, of course, that occurs on the outside of the vehicle. So I don't think that the ionization itself is what is responsible for the movement of the vehicle. I think there's something else going on. Now, one of the things I want to mention about your test bed there is that one of the things you need to know about the capacitor plates in the ARV is they are not solid copper, as I once believed. They're actually a foil lamination. And the foil lamination is a combination of an alloy produced by Dow Chemical. It's called AZ31X. It's a magnesium zinc alloy. It's very thin layers that are bonded with molten bismuth. And the bismuth itself, actually, from what I'm told, plays a critical role in this whole effect of mass reduction when it's subjected to extremely high voltages. There was a fellow from Great Britain that had corresponded with me within the last 6 months or so that had explained the whole thing about how the bismuth was so important to the mechanism. I will do my best to retrieve that piece of correspondence and make sure that you get a copy of it, along with anybody else in the the broadcast here who's interested.
Thank you so much. That would be fantastic.
But the thing is that the plates are actually, it's a foil lamination. I think the layers of magnesium zinc foil are something like 5 to 7 mils thick, with a very, very thin layer of bismuth in between. And they're sandwiched, maybe 20 or 30 layers to create a package that's approximately 1/2 inch thick. Seems like I lost my video feed here again.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm putting the image back up. Hopefully you can see that.
Oh, okay. All right, there we go. Like that coastal scene in the background too. That's nice.
Oh, yeah.
It looked like Catalina Island or something. Anyhow, so the individual plates are this magnesium zinc and bismuth foil lamination that I talked about, but then they are externally clad with a layer of copper sheeting, and it's a high temperature copper alloy. It's not pure copper, but it is basically folded around a cut and shaped magnesium zinc alloy foil lamination with the copper cladding on the outside. And the reason for that is that in the process of assembling the capacitor array, they have to subject the quartz, the so-called Herkimer quartz, to something approaching somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 degrees to slump that quartz down. And I was looking at how you could perform this manufacturing process without melting the copper. And so it actually occurred to me that what they could do would be to actually have pre-cut, polished wedges of the Herkimer quartz that were very precisely cut to the shape of these individual wedges. They could put them all into a tray, if you will, a very large tray that would allow you to stack the alternating layers of Herkimer quartz and the capacitor plates one after the other until you get 8 plates. And I think it's 10 layers of the Herkimer quartz, depending on which one of the sections you're talking about. There's 2 different arrays where one of the stacks sits a little bit higher than the package than the other. You can see that when you look at the edge of the array, how there's a slightly different arrangement. It's almost like each setup is flipped over so that the thicker portion is either at the bottom or the top, depending on whether you're in section 1 or section 2 or section 3. But then once all of these plates are assembled in cold form, they're then put into a kiln where the whole system is brought up to a temperature that allows the quartz to melt. And essentially it fuses everything together in that process without having to try and pour molten quartz into a mold with all of these copper plates and everything, the copper clad package of the capacitor foil lamination. But by doing this, you can control the clarity of the quartz. You don't have to worry about air bubbles getting in there and causing arc over and things like that. You can control and reduce to an absolute minimum any kind of occlusions that are in the quartz, little particles of dirt, what have you, dust, any impurities that would sacrifice the integrity of the capacitor array prior to assembly and melting it all together as one giant unit. Now, interestingly, if you go back through the UFO literature, there's Jim and Coral Lawrenson wrote a number of books about UFOs dating back, publishing back, starting in the 50s into the 60s and 70s. And in one of those books, there was an eyewitness account where a man was standing on the edge of a lake fishing, heard some weird sounds in the distance, standing right at the edge of some woods next to the lake. and he saw what appeared to be a flying saucer that was having flight control problems. It was wobbling and shooting off sparks and smoke and so forth. And so he dove into the bushes and watched this thing come down and hovered just a few feet above the ground, right near the location where he was standing. And he could see the ventral surface of the craft because it was elevated enough above the ground that he got a view up underneath this thing. And it had a series of these copper-colored panels that were divided up into sections, very much like what you see on the bottom of the Alien Reproduction Vehicle. And he said that one of the panels was smoking and shooting off sparks, and there were droplets of material dropping to the ground right on the shore of the lake. And that while he watched, this panel that apparently had the defect stopped shooting off sparks. He said there was this mechanical sound where the wedge-shaped panel was pulled outward and moved upward and withdrawn up into the craft, and then a new panel slid over, it dropped down into position, was pushed into the center, basically plugged into the array, and then a little while later, the craft began, making those little, oscillating sounds that you hear so stereotypically in the science fiction movies. Kind of sound.
Mark, now, if I could jump in quickly, and I should apologize. I do have a few questions for everyone, but what you just mentioned is very interesting. I read a book. It was a UFO book when I was a kid. It was a compendium. And I remembered this story because it happened probably about 10 miles from my house. But in one of the San Juan Islands, the story goes, I read this when I was like 12 or 13, that the exact same thing happened, that a quote unquote UFO was flying over the islands, over the Puget Sound, and had that event happen with sparking, and it basically stopped and hovered, and it had molten metal flowing out of the bottom of it. And so I guess it flew all over the beach, right? And they managed to do something changed, some repairs were done, and this thing flew off. And in the book, actually, the government sent a private investigator out to try and recover the metal, but it had already been recovered by someone else. They weren't sure, and then bring in all the Men in Black sightings and all that kind of stuff. The story ended with the metal scraps they were able to put together. I believe they were flying them back to Colorado, and the transport plane crashed, and the metal was never found. So, but if it's okay, let me jump in really quick. David Alzafon had a question. Let me unmute here. Let me unshare my screen real quick, and that way I can get into my gallery view. And David, do you still have questions? Let me ask you to unmute there.
This is fascinating because the first time I saw this drawing was when it got onto the internet without any attribution for the artist. And here's Mark telling the whole story, and it's fantastic. I actually printed it out, put it on my wall so I could look at it all the time. And eventually I showed it to my dad, and at the time, nobody knew what those plates at the bottom were. And he pointed to them and said, it's a capacitor. But he had a different idea of what the function of the capacitor was. And so I wondered if you knew of any evidence that the hull of the craft, or the central core, was being pulsed with microwave radiation, and if the pilots were shielded from microwave radiation.
Yes, in fact, one of the original witnesses had mentioned that the entire exterior of the craft had what looked, he called it a goopy lead paint, was the term that he used to describe, but he said it looked like thousands upon thousands of flecks of little tiny metal particles that were suspended in a resin, and the resin had been painted over the entire exterior of the vehicle. And it seems to me, I recall that he mentioned that there did seem to be something like a layer of lead or lead coating on the inside of the crew compartment. I wondered about that because I couldn't imagine that the electromagnetic fields that help the system function could propagate through a lead shield like that. Maybe they can. I mean, I don't think lead is really a very good conductor. I don't know whether it's permeable by electromagnetic fields and so forth, but there did seem to be some manner of protection from the ionization that you're concerned about. Yes.
And the external plates, do you know what they were made of in the skirt?
Those were made of a composite material. He said they looked like they were made of very thick, very compressed fiberglass material that you could actually see the cords of the reinforcing material in the panels. He said, in fact, that it looked like this thing had been slapped together in somebody's garage because it had a very rough, very, one-off kind of appearance to it. So that does seem to line up with some of the things I've heard from some of the other contributors here.
And the last question I had was concerning the propulsion. Now you've talked about the Bifield Brown effect. I'm looking at it from a different perspective, of course. And so I wondered if anybody had seen any evidence of very small rockets or air jets on the outside of the hull. And no, okay.
No.
What about magnets that would pivot somewhere around in the base?
No, I couldn't say that there were. I do know that one of the other components that it does not appear in the drawing that were described were two large deep draw industrial grade batteries like you would find on those electric forklifts they use in factories, probably 36 inches wide, 12 to 15 inches deep, and maybe 3 feet high, something like that. There were a pair of those that were responsible for the startup of the system, from what I understood. Now, it sounded like, from what the witness was saying, that I'm trying to remember the term that was used. A bloom line, I think, was the term I heard. But basically, it involved charging up all of the capacitor arrays one at a time, so they all had a charge, and then discharging them in series. Does that make any sense?
Series, yeah. Yeah, well, this is a moment I wish my dad was around because I'm sure he would have some very interesting questions to ask. But for me, that's about it.
Charging up the capacitor plates in parallel and then discharging them in series is a Marx generator.
Yeah, I'm holding one right here if you want to share. This is what a Marx generator looks like.
There he goes. Just it pulls it right out of the back.
So yeah, so in between each of these segments is a balancing resistor that just sort of goes up the chain. So all of these will charge up to roughly about 14,000 volts in parallel. And then when they reach just about 14,500, and the lowest stage is charged first because they have the lowest resistance, a spark will discharge across here, and that will send an impulse up to the next stage, which will start to ionize the channel. And the cascade gets faster and faster and faster in order to create a very fast impulse. Now this impulse is pretty quick, but it's not really fast enough to see some of the effects. So you can use a configuration called a Bloomian line in order to take that charge impulse and increase its forward velocity and increase its potential up to the order of megavolts. So inside of a T laser, a transverse electric mode laser that you can make using two parallel plates inside atmosphere, also a type of nitrogen laser, that ionization channel is only able to ionize because the discharge of the capacitor that's aligned with those plates is so fast, and that's called a Bloomian line. It's because the discharge follows from one side of the capacitor plate, let's say from the inside, and then it travels towards the outside. That's one way to do it. Or you can just send it up a parallel single conductor, and by the time it reaches the end of the conductor, it can have significant increases in potential.
Wow, well, it sounds just like what the doctor ordered.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So
I can't wait to start working on this.
Yeah.
Question for you. Quick question for you. If this thing is hit by a lightning bolt, what happens with all the system?
Well, I almost tried to imagine that it would actually store the charge.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let me get Bill Alec on because he had a question. Let me see. And again, I should apologize, guys. We've got a lot of people in the conference.
Can you hear me?
There you go. Thanks, Bill. Okay.
Okay, Tim. Yeah, Mark, is it safe to say that this outer shell with these panels could be some sort of a metamaterial? You mentioned something about a Tesla coil. Probably the center column is like a Tesla coil assembly. And then maybe this outer ring here of coils could be part of that Tesla coil arrangement. And then these panels could be some sort of a metamaterial that's used to affect the flux being produced, the high voltage flux being produced by these by this Tesla coil, and that's used to cause like a torsion effect, bending that flux, giving you the perhaps the negative energy required to lower the mass of this ship. That's what I'm thinking of. And that these cylinders in here could be part of like a fuel cell arrangement, maybe feeding a fuel cell of some sort to power this craft.
Well, let me ask you a question. The external panels that make up the skirt of the craft were not electrically charged, from what I've been told. They were a composite material. In fact, the vintage of the aircraft goes back as far as there were photographs taken near Provo, Utah in 1966 or 1967, in July of that year, of a craft that looked essentially like this vehicle. The main difference being that the synthetic vision system, the little blisters on the top half of the crew compartment, were quite a bit larger, maybe twice to 3 times as large. And when you think about it, the synthetic vision system that was described to me was described as looking exactly like the surveillance cameras that were used in the casinos in Las Vegas. Just an acrylic blister with a little camera underneath, a little CCD camera. But the camera technology that was available in 1966, 1967, when the craft was originally deployed, was quite a bit larger. And so that makes sense that the synthetic vision, the blisters, the bubbles on the outside of the aircraft would have been larger to accommodate the larger size of the cameras that were available at that time. Now, as far as controlling the flux using metamaterials, given the vintage of the aircraft, which was in the 60s, I'm not sure that there were any materials available at that time. So I would lean towards saying no, that's probably not the case.
Okay. A few years ago, I was approached by this fellow at the Tesla Tech conference. His name was Bob Boyce. I don't know if anyone has ever heard of him. He told me he was a tech over there at Area 51. And he was hired in to solve a problem with these ARVs. And the problem was, it was called inertia leakage would occur in these ships. And they would not have a consistent field around them, and inertia would leak into it, assuming that, we're doing this mass modification.
Right.
Okay, and that this leakage would occur, and it would essentially just kill the pilots through this inertia leakage, is what he referred to it. And he was hired to solve that problem back then. So that was the story he told me back at the conference.
Now, I've never heard that term before, inertia leakage, but it suggests to me that there was a lack of integrity in the field around the vehicle, and that if in fact there is a high level of ionization that's moving in and around the vehicle itself, if you have a an irregular distribution of charge in that field, and you have some kind of an arc over or a high voltage discharge, yeah, I would say that would probably kill the pilots. In fact, there was one account that I had been privy to in the late 1980s, early 1990s that described one of these vehicles exploding, and it sounded to me like they had achieved some kind of a runaway condition in the spin up of that homopolar generator in the center of the vehicle, and that the flywheel type device in the center of the vehicle had come apart and in the process had destroyed the vehicle. So I don't know if that helps with your answer, but I don't think the outer panels themselves are actually used in any way to control the amount of charge that's in and around the vehicle itself. They just seem to be, as they were described to me, just composite panels that were put together with Zeus fasteners.
Now, Mark, and I should apologize for jumping in again. I've got more questions. So I'm going to go to Jeremy Reese in just a minute, but I did have one. Ang had asked, let me see, actually he'd asked a couple of things. One of them was, and I'm not sure if you know the answer, this is a reproduction of the Roswell vehicle, the Roswell UFO. I think what he was asking was, how would this vehicle be related to the Roswell craft, or would it, I guess?
Well, it's hard to say. The term alien reproduction vehicle was the phrase that they used to describe it within the group of people that were there at Lockheed Skunk Works. Whether that means it was actually the reproduction of alien technology, I never got an answer to that question, so I don't know. But here again, they also refer to it as the Flux liner, which was kind of a roundabout way of expressing the fact that the propulsion system relied on high voltages.
Okay.
So that's about as far as I can go with that question, because I really don't know the answer.
Oh, 1 second. Are people here familiar with, I'm Ron Nikita, I came on board here.
Hi, Ron.
Are people familiar, are people familiar with homopolar generators as a group?
I am.
Jeremy.
Ron, yeah, I am too. I wanted to ask Mark too about the homopolar generator you mentioned with the kilovolt output. I've never heard of that. Is there any way we could get a link to that? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Let's do that, and then let me put Jeremy Reese on then after that.
Yeah,
Sorry to disrupt.
No, Jeremy. Good question. I went looking for information about commercially available industrial homopolar generators and found a series of photographs and diagrams showing a device that involved a smaller diameter disc, but quite a bit thicker disc that was spun up that had coils around it. And the claim was that its output was something in the neighborhood of 10,000 volts. So, you know, I found that just in a basic search on the internet. So I imagine, you know, I don't want to possibly jeopardize the link here, but I would be willing to go searching for that during the course of our conversation, or see if I couldn't find that particular site again. But I did find it in just a basic search on the internet.
Thanks for that. By the way, that was Ron Kita who asked the question about that. Ron has been a longtime UFO. A longtime propulsion researcher. He's not really a UFO guy. He's a big time physics guy, and he's in all those email lists with if you go over those email lists with guys like Eric Davis and Puthoff going way back, and he's been doing this much longer than a lot of people in the group. So just a great to have you here, Ron. Thanks for joining us and asking those
welcome
questions.
Well, I want to add, I actually built homopolar generators, and there's the one-piece homopolar generator. I guess a lot of people, how many people bought the homopolar handbook by Tom Balone? Many or?
I think I have a copy of that.
Yeah, well, I actually got into them a strange way. The homopolar generator, if you look at them commercially, they were mostly made as welders, because what they do, they produce high amperage at low volts. In fact, when I made them, even Tom said, I built one using the no mercury contacts. For certain, I took the risk. It's very, don't do it, because when you get a high amperage and you have mercury contacts, you generate mercury vapor. And at one time I did get mercury poisoned. It's not a nice thing to do. But Tom Balone, I bought his ring magnets. He got some giant ring magnets. Oh, I guess they're probably 18 inches in diameter.
Wow.
And he was done making homopolar generators. And he gave me, well, I guess you're familiar that the only one that interests me is the one-piece homopolar generator. Are you familiar with the distinction of the one-piece?
That was the type that I saw the diagram for, yes.
Yeah, because what it is, Faraday, it's in Faraday's notes. Faraday, what he took a cylindrical magnet polarized through the thickness and bonded a circular plate to it. So what happened is the magnet rotated with the disk. That's why it's called one piece. The armature and the stator are one. And you can't make any conventional motor in which the armature and the stator are one piece. And
We lost the audio feed there on Ron Kita.
Sorry about that. That was me. Actually, let me put Jeremy back on. Sorry, I'm trying to work the controls. Ron, I apologize for that. Let me put Jeremy back on, because I think he had actually a couple of questions.
I have some questions for Mark real quick about from the live chat, because we have actually almost 175 people watching the live chat right now. This has been one of my best live streams ever, which is awesome. Thanks.
Congratulations.
A question was about the power source on board, like a craft. Obviously, we have power plants on the ground to do experiments with our experiments, but how do you build, how do you build something that would work as a power source? And what was the power source on board the ARV, as far as you're aware of? How was the power provided to create these kinds of energies?
Okay, I earlier described the two large industrial deep draw batteries that were used in the system to start it up, where they would charge the individual capacitor banks to capacity, and then they would discharge in series around the loop of the array, the capacitor array. Now, inside the central column was a mercury vapor that was subjected to a extremely high voltage electrical discharge. There's a set of coils around the outside of the vehicle, and then there's a set of coils around the column in the center, which acted like a high voltage transformer, like a Tesla coil. And so the voltage discharge on the inside of that central column would erupt from an electrode at the top. Now, interestingly, this electrode had a Venturi-shaped, like a velocity stack on a race car. Had a cute cat. Yeah, had a Venturi around it, so that when the discharge from that electrode occurred and it would fire down through the center of that central column, it would create a turbulence pattern that looked like a smoke ring. Like, you've seen smokers, the guy smoking a cigar, and he poofs and he blows out a perfect ring of smoke. It's kind of like what would they call it? A self-stabilizing high energetic event, except in this case, we're talking about ions passing through the mercury vapor. And this ring of ions would shoot down through the inside of the central column. Now, on the inside of the central column, wrapped around the inside, going all the way down, was what I've been calling a bottle brush electrode. It looked like a very long bottle brush with bristles that in the scale of the central column being about 3 feet in diameter, the bottle brush bristles would extend out about maybe 3 inches in diameter. And this thing was wrapped around the inside of the central column from top to bottom. And this event, this smoke ring of mercury ions would shoot down through the inside of that column, and the vorticular patterns, the flow pattern in the ions, would stroke across the bristles of this electrode And that was where you would get these high voltages that would come in and then be stored on the capacitor array for the next series in the discharge of the system. So that it was a pulsing system. And I'm not sure how fast it pulsed, but I was led to believe that it would pulse at a very high frequency. So I don't know if this makes any sense.
It does, and I just want to point out a couple things that people can look up for academic research that might be potentially related to this. One of the things is called spatiotemporal optical vortices. That's STOVs. They're a new type of optical orbital angular momentum and optical phase circulation in space-time. And the other thing that people can look up is what are called flying electromagnetic donut pulses and flying electromagnetic donuts. And you'll find a lot of interesting stuff related to these smoke rings and these self-sustaining vortices that is potentially very much related to some of the research that, has been going on connected to this. Another thing I want to ask is what are someone asked the performance characteristics of this kind of aircraft. What's the maximum speed, the acceleration, just some, what do you know about the performance characteristics, the flight characteristics?
One of the witnesses said that he saw a video that was being played on a display monitor next to the smallest of the three craft that were in the exhibit. And he said that the craft was being filmed in an area that looked like a dry lake bed, and that the vehicle was shown hovering above the lake bed, and that it initially made three very rapid hopping movements where it would go up and then down and then up and then down again. Did this 3 times very rapidly, like bouncing almost across the landscape without touching the ground. And then from a hovering position, basically went up and out of the frame, and the camera tilts up to follow it. And the thing is almost so far away that you could barely see it in the film, but the camera tilts up to follow the movement and the acceleration. Taking into consideration, of course, that we're talking about something that's rendering the craft and everything inside of it pretty much massless or dramatically reduced in mass. So the acceleration factor doesn't really come into play for the people inside the event horizon of the field that this thing creates. But to the outside observer, the acceleration would have appeared on the par with about 20 Gs. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. So Jeremy, if it's okay, let me jump over to Wayne.
I have one more last question before you can do,
okay, let's do that then.
People are asking you to talk more about the gas and liquid versions of the center column and to talk more about that center column.
Okay. This is, I started to sort of go off onto this particular tangent earlier and then didn't quite get a chance to complete that. But so one of the things that occurred to me when this story came to me in 1988, 1989, and I began trying to ascertain the authenticity of not only the claim, but the validity of the technology that was claimed to be a part of the system, was to look around and see whether or not there was any cross-pollination, any kind of evidence outside of the basic story from the eyewitness that this kind of technology was seen or had been seen inside the stereotypical alien flying saucer, from the alien abductees and this kind of thing. I had occasion to make an appearance on a radio program out of Las Vegas. It's a precursor of Art Bell's Coast to Coast AM. It was called The Happening with a fellow by the name of Billy Goodman. This was circa 1989, 1990, kind of being broadcast out of Las Vegas. And Billy Goodman had a tremendous fascination with UFOs and the whole genre of alien abductions, this kind of thing. And so he had a number of witnesses, individuals on the program who claimed that they had been victims of the so-called alien abduction phenomenon. And I thought, well, okay, if that's true, then there might be a chance, however slim, that these people who had experienced this had an opportunity to see or to be shown components that were part of the propulsion system. And so I contacted Billy Goodman through the radio station. I asked him if he had ever interviewed any of these individuals who'd claimed that they had been involved in the so-called alien abduction phenomenon. And I could just imagine people in the audience rolling their eyes and saying, oh, okay, now it's getting too far out. But anyway, so he said, yes, there were several young ladies that he had interviewed over a course of time who had claimed and, had everything from missing pregnancies to scoop marks and this kind of thing that suggested that there was some authenticity to their claims. So he gave me the names, we got the permission first from these individuals, gave me the names of a couple of the young ladies, and I contacted these people and interviewed them face to face on a one-on-one basis, and was stunned, absolutely stunned by the things that I saw and heard. And principally because two of these individuals had implants that you could see, you could either see the implant behind the eardrum. Most people don't realize that the eardrum is a very thin diaphragm of tissue, and it's semi-transparent. You can actually, with a good otoscope, this little thing that the ear, nose, and throat doctor uses to look in your ears and see what the health of your inner ear is, you can actually shine a light in there, and you can actually look through the eardrum and see part of the cochlea, the part of the ear that discriminates what frequencies of sound you hear. But this young lady had an otoscope that she'd gone out and bought in order to show her friends, yes, for real, I've got an implant in my ear behind my eardrum. And sure as heck, she did. I had took the otoscope and I looked in fact, I looked at the other ear that did not have this implant to see what the normal sort of control eardrum looked like. And then she showed me the one on the side with the implant, and you could see this device. It looked like kind of a fat metallic horseshoe, basically sitting right over the top of the tympanic bones that go between the eardrum and the cochlea. It just gave me chills to see this. And what was really weird was that this young lady, within a year or so after her abduction, had also experienced the so-called military abduction, where a bunch of guys in, like Green Berets showed up in the middle of the night, kick in her back door. I saw the back door with the big characteristic sawtooth chukka boot tread pattern on the door, where they kicked in the door, hauled her out, used an aerosol to knock her out instantly. Subsequently found out from another friend of mine in the special ops community that the aerosol is referred in the community to the angel of death in a can. It's a chemical called tryptomethyl chloride. It dramatically increases the amount of serotonin and melatonin produced in the brain. The minute you smell it, knocks you out, puts you to sleep, basically. And if they give you enough of an inhalation of this stuff, it'll stop your heart. It'll put you to sleep for good. But they sprayed this stuff in her face, knocked her out, hauled her out on a stretcher. Her neighbors, who were terrified, saw the whole thing because of the commotion, the noise that it made when these people showed up, hauled her off. She was put into a helicopter that was sitting on a helicopter pad right at the base of Mount Wilson, just in Pasadena. And I've been there, I've seen the place where she was taken to. She was taken there on a Humvee on the stretcher from her house around this valley that she lived on the edge of to the helipad, put on the helicopter. The helicopter took off, flew over Mount Wilson, and was going into the high desert. When she regained consciousness, began to wake up, they sprayed her again a second time. Next thing she knows, she wakes up in an underground facility. She's in a room, checkerboard, black and white, square pattern, tiles on the floor, no windows. And she overheard a lieutenant colonel. She recognized his rank insignia and his uniform, Air Force rank, lieutenant colonel, talking to some medical techs about how they were going to get this implant out of her ear without actually killing her or permanently disabling her ability to hear anything. And they were convinced that they couldn't take this thing out without harming her. So at this point, the military people leave the room, and these little gray, stereotypical gray aliens come in with the big eyes, the big heads, and all this kind of stuff. And she said, I made a discovery that night. She says, they made me so angry that I would not look at them. And she said, I discovered that the whole vehicle to their control over human beings is through the eyes. There's something in the optics of the eyes. If you don't look into their eyes, they can't control you. She wouldn't look at them. And so she said, these entities were running around the room, bumping into the wall, looked like little toy robots that were all sort of running around, bumping into each other, bumping into the walls. They were terrified because they couldn't control her because she would not make eye contact with them. And at that point, a much larger, about a 9-foot tall entity looked like a praying mantis with black obsidian hard rock sort of exterior, came in wearing kind of, like the sort of a hooded robe, walked in and basically forced her telepathically to submit. And she says, the next thing I remember, I woke up in my bed. Well, all of these things sound highly suspicious and very strange, but I looked in the ear and I saw the implants. I met another young lady who had had similar experiences, and she described her abduction sequence and being put on a table, having her head locked into a harness, kind of a saddle that came up behind the neck on either side of the head, with her head turned back, and a kind of a plate that came in, grabbed her lower jaw, held it down, and a device trundles up to the table. This thing looks like a giant mechanical arm, extends out with two, would look like two giant syringes side by side. And she said the extension, the needles, if you will, that came out of these syringes were about a 3/8 of an inch or 3/16 of an inch in diameter. And there was like a little BB type device on the end of each one of these extensions. And these things were driven right through the roof of her mouth and into the lower brain case with no anesthetic at all. She passed out in the process from the pain. And so after I'd interviewed her, I said, well, okay, interesting story. Have you ever had an X-ray where these things could be seen? And she said she had. And I said, well, were there any scars that were left over from this process? And she said, yes, there were. And I said, well, I've got a flashlight out of my car. Let's go out and have a look. And so up to that point, I was, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. She opens up her mouth and I shine my flashlight in there. And I saw right at the tail end of the hard palate of the roof, right in front of the uvula, there's a little thing that hangs down in the back of your mouth, looks like a little stalactite. Just in front of that are two penetration scars, look like two small 22 caliber bullet holes in the roof of her mouth. And I mean, I got chills when I saw this. But she also described seeing a propulsion system. And this propulsion system involved a central column with a small diameter spinning device at the base of it. It was sitting down in a circular kind of a well below the floor level. There was a railing around this pit that this central column was mounted in the center of. She said that in the central column was what looked like a liquid mercury with small flecks of darker material, like little flakes of pepper that were sort of circulating. But because of the way this material was, whatever the material was, this liquid was in the column, she said that she could see turbulence patterns in the liquid because the column was constructed of a clear glass-like substance. She could see the liquid moving around inside this column. And what she saw looked like a series of tornadoes that followed a helical pattern that basically ascended and spiraled, went around the circumference of the column as it was ascending. And those vortices themselves were spinning. And there were, 5 or 6 of them around the circumference of the whole cylinder as this process was ongoing. Now, if you know anything about hydrodynamics and fluids and the things that go on in fluids, you know that if you have that kind of a circulation pattern, you basically have 2 surfaces that are moving past one another in opposite directions, basically like taking a pen or a pencil and rolling it between your fingers. That kind of a process is going on. That would create that kind of a circular pattern or circulation pattern in the liquid that was inside the column. But if there are 2 different columns and the liquid is ascending as it's being twisted on the way up, that means that it's also coming back down. It's a closed loop. So that means that the system that they're using in the more advanced version of this propulsion system involves a mercury liquid that has 2 concentric cylinders, one inside the other, spinning in opposite directions. And that the liquid is being introduced into the top of the system during the electrical discharge event. And as that loop of that loop of charged ions is shooting down through the inside of that inner cylinder, it's performing the same function, perhaps in a more efficient way than the one that uses the gaseous version of mercury. Anyway, so that's one little story.
Okay, let me jump back in. Let me go to Wayne now, and I should apologize for stepping out for just a sec. And let me see. There we go.
Yeah, hi everybody. It's great to be here and to see you all. So I just wanted to address the question that David had earlier about the, because I think I know where he's coming from with the theory. I'm pretty familiar with the theory of Alzapon, Fred Alzapon, and dynamic nuclear orientation. And so what I think, I have a couple of ideas that might apply to the pulsing of the capacitor plates and those high intensity electric fields going across those dielectric materials, and the interaction of the bismuth atoms with those fields. So what I've had this idea for a while, and there's 2 possibilities I think might make a connection. So in a capacitor, when the dielectric is polarized, as we know, the orbital electrons are pulled to one side of the nucleus. So that makes an asymmetric magnetic field. So those unpaired electrons that are pulled to one side, their magnetic moment might influence the magnetic moment of the nucleus, causing it also to orient itself or reorient itself in one direction. So you have, in a sense, you have a type of dynamic nuclear orientation with the pulsing, the electrical pulsing of the dielectric material. And I think that might have an effect with the atoms that have the unpaired nuclear spins in the dielectric. The other possibility is there is something called, which is like, it's a type of NMR. It's called NQR, and that stands for nuclear quadrupole resonance. So it's a type of spectroscopy they use, or that's known about, where instead of using radio waves and magnetic fields to orient or process nuclei or nuclear particles, it's called zero field NMR. So there's no magnetic field, but instead what it uses is in the nucleus, certain nuclei have an unequal distribution of charge. So when you apply an electric field, it creates a moment on the electric field which would cause it to reorient itself in alignment with that electric field. Just looking on some of the charts, I mean, not every atom has this property. I believe it's generally the nucleus with an odd number of nucleons in it, or an odd number of protons. But so it is possible to use oscillating electric fields to cause the nucleus to vibrate or orient itself repeatedly. So I think that might, it's just two ideas there. I think that might be a unifying principle that brings what your father's theory is, and also what might be observed in this craft as well. So I just want to leave that with you guys, and any input that you have there would be great to hear. Thanks.
Thanks, Wayne. I don't know if Ron caught that. I don't see him on the screen.
Oh, was he asking about Ron Kita's?
Well, I think he was making reference to what David had talked about in his father's research about subatomic particles and the things that they happen to the electrons when they are subjected to certain type of dynamic charging forces and so forth. Did I get that right, Wayne? I don't hear him.
Yeah. So I would encourage you guys to just read up on what David has written about the theory. Basically, if you're familiar with dynamic nuclear polarization, which is a well-known technique, which is like NMR on steroids, creates a hyperpolarized state in a material. So what they use is a magnetic field that they apply externally to a sample, and that causes you can do it. You can target the nucleus directly, or you can, in the case of DNP or DNO, which the Elzaphan's are talking about, you put the external magnetic field across the material, which causes the electrons to precess around that field, and they precess is what's called the Larmor frequency. And so at that Larmor frequency, that's like a resonant frequency, right? So if you then excite the material usually with microwaves, if you're doing dynamic nuclear orientation or dynamic nuclear polarization, you'd be probably working with the microwave band, right? So that, because of the coupling between the unpaired electrons and the nucleus, so they transfer their angular momentum to the nucleus. So when they get excited, they tip over, and then that causes the nucleus also to tip over, and then they sort of, they precess very violently. And so in the spectroscopy, they use that, then they turn the field off. Once they turn the field off, then the nuclear particles relax. That's called the relaxation time. And as they're relaxing, they're then giving off this same frequency of radio wave energy. So that's then detected. So that's kind of that whole science and that process. So in NMR, they don't target the electrons, they target the nucleus directly. And they do kind of the same thing with applying radio waves to excite the nucleus into precession.
And then that gives a signal back. Yeah, me and Wayne are both working on the same system of dynamic nuclear orientation. And something that David Alzaphan mentioned earlier was that his dad told him there's another way to do it without microwave energy, just by spinning the sample in the homogeneous area or the laminar area of a magnetic field. That's exactly what you have over here. In the core of the ARV is a spinning aluminum flywheel. And the reason why you're using aluminum is because it has a high strength memory effect for its nucleus. The nucleus maintains the orientation the best of all the elements. But just by spinning it inside the laminar section of a magnetic field, you're able to create dynamic nuclear orientation, which then permeates the rest of the vessel And I think what's going on in the plate is sort of the Podkleonov effect, the impulse capacitor that he built. So that's what I think is going on in the base. So this is a source of thrust. This is a source of dynamic nuclear orientation. And this is the control rod to control which ones we're turning on. And somebody asked me once why I thought it hopped. And I said, probably because they couldn't complete the dynamic nuclear orientation enough because it was close to the Earth. And dynamic nuclear orientation is basically it's a state of matter. Think of this, the second law of thermodynamics states that everything becomes entropy, everything becomes messed up. So, you drop an egg, it becomes, a mess, and you can't make the chicken hatch again. So the same thing happens at the core of an atom as well. The subatomic particles, their spins are intrinsically, all completely random. And that is one of the fundamental facts of nature. And it probably, most likely connects with Earth's gravitic field, because Earth's gravitic field comes from the nucleus. So it should also be in this random state of entropy. So what we're trying to do over here is create dynamic nuclear orientation, or basically creating coherent matter. Just like coherent light is a laser, incoherent light is, everything else. We're trying to create coherent matter, which removes yourself from the inertial frame. Now, to create that to that point is pretty difficult, and it doesn't work up to 100%. So you still need a thrusting vector to move around.
Now, would you consider that a polarization process, Mark?
Yeah, you're polarizing the you're polarizing the atoms in the molecules of the craft. It's polarization of the craft.
Is Tim still online here?
Yeah, I'm still here, and actually, I just turned off Ron's video because it looks like, yeah.
I couldn't tell whether he was there or not.
No,
can I ask a favor, Tim?
Sure.
Is it possible to get a bathroom break?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well.
So what? Yeah. Why don't we take 5 minutes, and what I'll do is mute everyone, and then we'll come back. It's 1:56 now. So, do you guys want to come back at 2?
How about don't mute everyone? Just leave the conversation open.
Okay. So
right.
I guess we'll reconvene in about 5 minutes then, and I'll put it on gallery view.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, I guess it's open, and I'll just ask all to unmute right now, and
everyone can introduce themselves now. I see we have some new people. Rob Chambers. We got Brian Biason. Are you?
Yeah, and Brian actually. Brian had a question. So Brian was asking if the implant was taken out. Brian, can you?
Yeah, I was on Mark's in the bathroom.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
I guess that's a question for Mark, really.
Yeah, when Mark gets back, I was curious if he checked after to see if the implant was removed after she told the story. After he checked first, he saw it there. Then after, did he confirm that it was removed?
That would be interesting to find out. Kishle is from India. What time is it there?
It's basically 3:27 at midnight.
Okay, you're the youngest person here officially. Kishle's been emailing us because we also have this disclosure network where we're trying to bring about anti-gravity disclosure, trying to figure out how flying saucers operate out in the open. And that's pretty much the point of this conference, is just to talk about the engineering side of flying saucers.
Yes.
And, he's very passionate about it as well. So we'll let him in here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Jeremy, how's it going on YouTube?
It's going good, man. Vimana, sorry, I had a little, I was stepped away for a clean up, but I broke a glass, but yeah, we're still live. I'm monitoring the chat. I've caught back up now. And
there are 178 people in the chat. 178.
Yeah, man.
Oh wow, that's like an
impressive numbers.
That's a very impressive number. Yeah.
Yeah.
There it goes.
You know, considering we don't use like chat bots and stuff like David Wilcox and some of those other people, you know, if we had like the paid audience and viewers and stuff, we'd probably get like 10K, you know, people watching live, or it would look like it anyway.
Well, guys, if I could jump in for a second, I would say, you know, I think Mark, he probably has to go to work in just a little while. You know, but we don't have the opportunity to talk to him every day. If you guys have any pressing questions or technical questions or anything like that, you know, I would definitely give some thought.
Yeah, I wanted to hear more about the Herkimer quartz because that's something that we're actually planning on doing here in the lab. I found a local glass making company. They're a pretty cool place. They actually have solar panels on their roof to power the whole lab. And it's a school of glass making. And we were thinking about making our own parallel plate capacitors. And then I found this company. I'm like, Jeremiah, I'm not buying any glass making company equipment. Let's just go to their place. It's a half-an-hour drive from the lab here. And we plan on doing that next month. We're going to have we're renting a house, basically a guest house. Jeremiah is coming down. Wayne is flying in from Canada, and Jeremy's going to be there sometime. We're going to be all together just working in the lab right here on these experiments. It's going to be exciting. Oh, there you are, Mark.
I'm back.
I wanted to ask you about the need for
sorry, give me just a sec, Mark. Let me mute everyone, and then I will unmute you, gentlemen. And you know, Brian had a question. I think Brian just came back in. Brian was wondering if you had checked about the implant after, to see if the implant had been removed.
No, in fact, the thing that was really interesting was that about a year and a half or so after this investigation, the young lady reported that she had been abducted again, and that the problem was that in their attempts to remove this device from her ear, the military had damaged it. And so the aliens returned and not only replaced the implant in her first ear, but they put another one, a second implant in her other ear, which I had seen as a control in the very beginning. I'd looked at her healthy ear that hadn't been touched in any way. And here was this new, what appeared to be an even more advanced version of an implant that completely replaced the little tiny microscopic bones between the eardrum and the cochlea. It was basically a substitute that sat in between. And you're going to love this. The old implant on the other side had been replaced, and there were 3 spiral scars that were still bright red from a procedure where it appeared that the aliens had taken some kind of a tubular mandrel that had blades on it, and they had basically screwed it into her ear canal as a guide for making a precision removal of the damaged implant that had been there previously. You could see what appeared to be an incision mark on the eardrum. I don't know how they separated the eardrum and then brought the 2 sides of the tissue back together, but apparently they had that ability. And here was a second updated, so to speak, version of the implant in the ear that had the original implant that looked like a fat horseshoe that straddled the tympanic bones. This one was the second style, the one that was a solid black shiny disc that completely replaced the tympanic bones between the eardrum and the cochlea. So I mean, that was the follow-up, and that was striking because I had seen both before and after what the case was, you know, so it certainly established in my mind that there seemed to be some kind of an ongoing competition between the military trying to obtain the technology with minimal impact to the victims, and the aliens who, for whatever reason, were attempting to track particular human beings. Now, subsequent to this, the young lady went to a medical clinic and had a number of x-rays done on her head. And what she discovered was that she is a kind of genetic anomaly, whereas you and I have sort of hollow sinus cavities above our eyes and in our cheekbones that are part of the respiratory system. She doesn't have any sinus cavities in her forehead. It's an additional area of brain case. She has actually a larger brain. So she apparently is some kind of a hybrid individual. She is genetically different than you and I. She has no sinuses in her forehead. She has additional brain case.
Okay, so I was going to ask about the Herkimer quartz in the parallel plate capacitors.
Okay.
You know, why it needs to be Herkimer quartz, not just regular quartz, or?
Well, you know, I don't know the answer to that. I can tell you that when I was part of the disclosure project with Dr. Stephen Greer, from time to time, he would give me the contact information for people who had approached him that claimed that they or family members that they knew of had been involved in working on, repairing, or helping to build the original ARV. So in one instance, there was a young man who lived in the Seattle area, as I recall. He claimed that his mother had worked at Lockheed Skunk Works and that she had been in a hands-on position as far as working on and assembling and testing of the original ARV. And he was the individual who claimed that they were specifically using Herkimer quartz as the dielectric for their capacitor section.
Oh, okay, because we're actually here in northern New Jersey. We're able to go and get some Herkimer quartz and see if there's any difference between that and regular quartz. And from everything that I could search online and found out about Herkimer quartz, the only thing that's unique about it is that it forms in a place that does not have anything for it to attach to. Like quartz, when it forms in its molten form and when it's cooling, it normally gets attached to other rocks. So this is a type of quartz that doesn't have that ability because of the surrounding rocks. And that would be the only unique attribute about it. In which case, that would just make it a little harder to assemble because you'd have to get this quartz that's can only be mined in one place in the world, and it has some, magical function, sort of like an element 115 of quartz, make it hard.
Just to add, sorry, go ahead, Mark.
And me and Jeremiah were actually having a conversation about this. Is there anything special about?
Maybe I actually add something here, specifically about Herkimer quartz. One of our fellow researchers on the team, Sean, discovered, and we talked about this in quite a lengthy conversation that followed up Mark Sokol's and my conversation about Herkimer quartz and what's different about it. And what Sean had discovered is that Herkimer quartz is able to form in this area without any other material seemingly to connect with, because it contains carbon inclusions, long carbon inclusions. And this apparently changes the properties enough where the carbon inclusions can trigger or catalyze crystallization in the material. So we were also wanting to investigate the possibility of taking ordinary quartz, which is of course many times cheaper and more available, and basically adding our own carbon inclusions of various sorts.
In effect, doping it with
doping it with carbon to simulate Herkimer quartz.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the original witness had suggested to me that they were in fact doping the quartz in the capacitor section with heavy metals like uranium, and that by the statement that was made was that the higher the atomic number of the material they used to dope the quartz, the greater the mass reduction effect was per input of electrical power.
That makes sense to me because really, according to T. Townsend Brown's patent on the parallel plate capacitor experiment, the weight reduction was based off of the mass of the dielectric. So if you want the dielectric to be fucking heavy, you want it to be extremely heavy because that is where your pulse is coming from, that weight. So you want it to be as dense as possible. So you're going to throw in heavy elements that don't conduct electricity very well, probably like maybe bismuth or something like that. And maybe that's where the bismuth comes into the parallel plate capacitor.
To add to that, reading through Brown's notes, he talks a lot about using various lead oxides, which are rather heavy, and they are containing semiconductive properties. So Brown talks about in, I think, notebook number 2, about the semiconductive properties of the additives and how important these dopant materials actually are to the function of achieving the effect. And so we know Brown was quite the fan of using lead oxide and lead-2 oxide because that's a material that was available in his time. And in the correct concentrations as a dopant into the dielectrics, that lead oxide was the main contributor to the effect. So it wasn't necessarily heavy dielectrics as it was making sure that the dielectric contained a heavy element or something like that.
That's consistent with what the witness originally said to me, yeah.
Okay, so let me bring Paul Murad on. He had a question, so I'm going to ask Paul to unmute now.
Mark, you mentioned that these women had mentioned the propulsion system. I don't know if you covered it that much detail. Could you describe some more? And was one of the girls Andreessen?
No.
Okay.
But they don't live that far apart, probably less than 50 miles apart. The Andreessen case took place in, what was the name of this? Oh God. It was a particular canyon in Southern California, and it's right on the tip of my tongue. I can't remember the name of the canyon, but it's near Sylmar, California. And the other witness, the one that I had spoken about that had the implants in her ear, she lives in the community of Sierra Madre, which is right at the base of Mount Wilson in the Los Angeles area.
Well, what did they say that was so helpful to what's going on in terms of your knowledge about ARV?
Well, number one, there were several components in common. One was the central column that involved the use of something that appeared to be a mercury-like substance. In the case of the propulsion system she saw, it appeared to be liquefied mercury. But the flow patterns in the mercury suggested that, at least in that more advanced version of the propulsion system, that there might be counter-rotating cylinders and a movement of the mercury that facilitated the formation of these dynamic ionic smoke rings that would shoot down through the inside of the central column when the electrical discharge occurred. The second thing that I was about to say before the conversation sort of got diverted was that when she was standing at the railing of this pit, which was surrounding this central column, she said that she could look across to the far side of the pit and see the wall of the area beneath the floor that she was standing on, and that embedded, there was a clear glass-like substance that made up the entire height of that pit, and that embedded in that glass-like substance were what looked like copper coils that wrapped around what was probably the center section of this central column. And she said that she felt that the column extended below the floor, that the deck that she was on was somewhere in the center, from vertically oriented. If you talk about the vertical orientation or the location within the craft, that she was somewhere near the center section of the craft, and that she was seeing the upper portion of that central column.
So you're talking about the column, the plates on the bottom. Did she talk about the ring?
She talked about the coils. She never saw the plates in the bottom, but she did say that the type of craft that she was in was not a saucer, that it was more of a sphere-shaped craft.
Oh,
and
wow.
Just by coincidence, when I had occasion to visit this individual from time to time, and there was an occasion when I went over to her house in the early evening. We went for a walk as we were talking because she was concerned about being overheard by some of her neighbors who by this time apparently had been approached by the military and were looking for tidbits of information about the timing of these visits that she was receiving. Coincidentally, they were always on either the 11th or the 22nd of the month, whenever they happened. So I was talking with her when we went for this walk, and it was dark out, and we looked up, and way up in the sky, here is this little white sphere following us around, and you could see it moving around the sky. It was, in a very sort of irregular pattern of movement. You could tell that it wasn't a balloon because it was sitting stationary against a slight wind, and it seemed to orient itself and change its orientation every time we moved. So we were certain that this thing it had an interest in my talking to her. And what was interesting was that I was spending a lot of time watching the sky, both from the location where I lived at the time, which was in Upland, California. It's just on the outskirts of San Bernardino, and also traveling up into the mountains near Big Bear and watching the high desert from that location, during which time I saw a number of things that apparently were being flight tested that uses the same technology, would leave a green wavering ionization trail that ran horizontally for a certain number of miles and then would stop dead in its tracks. I've seen that many times over the years. Oh, what was I going to say?
You ever seen a triangular craft?
I have never seen one of those, but this young lady has on a number of occasions. Can we go back to what was your original question, Paul? I'm sorry.
I was curious about what they were talking about in terms of propulsion systems that was different from what you had already mentioned.
Oh, okay. The things that were in common. Well, they both had coils around the central column. They both had a column. They both had some kind of a small disc that rotated at the midpoint of the central column. In the case of the Alien Reproduction Vehicle, it was much larger in diameter, 9 feet approximately in diameter in the 24-foot diameter craft, and that's measuring right at the base, at the widest part of the skirt at the bottom of the craft, 24 feet. But in the case of this object, this ring that was rotating at the base of this clear glass column inside the craft that this young lady was traveling in, she said that it only extended out maybe between 2 and 4 inches away from the outer diameter of that central column. What
causes a spinning disc, Mark?
What color was it?
What causes the spinning disc?
Based on the analysis by my electrical engineering friend who looked at the design of the ARV, it appeared that those cylinders that were underneath the disc on the ARV were actually a series of induction coils, and that those coils could be charged in sequence, and that would actually stimulate the rotation of the disc. I think that what Jeremy was saying about, or Jeremiah was saying about the disc being made of aluminum stands to reason, because I know that aluminum
I can clarify it if you want. So here's the aluminum disc. This is a 6 1/4 inch diameter rotor data disc from the inside of a hard drive platter. And if we compare this and we take a look, so here's the inside of a induction motor. And for this case, for efficiency, they've slanted the non-magnetic metal shroud housing around this material with the laminated plates. And basically the magnetic field orbits, or it rotates and spins to induce a current flow because of the end caps here, an electric current flow through this rotor, and this would create the rotation. So if you do the same thing, basically, let's see, do I have it sitting around?
This is wonderful. I love these demonstrations.
So if we take a coil assembly like this, now this coil assembly was designed to drive the internal diameter rotor, but if we were to take these coils facing inwards here and we were to flip them up so they were just sticking straight up like a bunch of solenoids next to each other, and we were to place them around the periphery near the closer to the edge, they would have more torque. But if we were to pulse them with a north and south interface here, between my fingers, for example, and then we were to suddenly shift the north-south interface to a position over here, the magnetic field of that shifting position from the north-south here to the north-south here would actually induce a current into and through the disk, causing the disk and the electrons within it to be dragged along, as the electrons wouldn't want to change their position within the magnetic flux being imparted on the disk. And
all right, so I could use the holes in there. I could use a hole in there, or put a turbine in there, put it in a cavity with a liquid mercury, and I could move that mercury around like crazy, right?
Oh yeah, you can move mercury around without any holes or gaps or anything else like that. All you need to do to move mercury around is
Magnetic
current
field.
flowing through it and place it within a magnetic field. Exactly. It's called magnetohydrodynamics. It's a whole entire study that you can research a lot.
Now,
Never heard of it.
That was
Never
the
heard of
basis.
it.
I'm sorry. That was the basis of Faraday's original motor design, wasn't it? Was the mercury, the movement of mercury in a petri dish?
Yeah, I do believe so. With the it demonstrated the rotation of the magnetic field around
if I
in
could
response.
jump in, there may be many people who could explain this. What would the purpose of the rotation be in the ARV? What do you have any ideas why would you want the disk to rotate, I guess?
Well, I think the disk was functioning both as a stabilization device and probably as one of the elements of a homopolar generator. I don't know if Jeremiah agrees with that, but that certainly seems to be the case.
You mean like a flywheel? Like a flywheel?
Yeah, like a flywheel, yeah.
So this is really a big thing. It's not light. It's not.
No, in the case of the ARV, the 24-foot diameter disc, the 24-foot diameter ARV had a 9-foot diameter disc in the center of the disc. And I would have to imagine that they used some special techniques in the construction of that disc to make sure that it wouldn't come apart under high RPM. You know, maybe laminating a number of different layers of metal to construct it.
Now let me bring Ron Kita in because I see that he there. Ron, you still with us?
I'm blank on the screen.
Yeah. Let me turn your camera back on here. Okay, ask start video, ask to unmute. There we go.
Am I there?
Yeah, there we go.
Start my video.
There we go.
I'm back.
Oh,
yeah, with homopolar. One thing we got into last time were the patents of Hank Wallace, who was a GE engineer out of Valley Forge Space Center, and he used metals that were higher than copper, in which the number of electrons and protons must always equal. When you go to heavier metals, up to plutonium, or beyond even, the heavier metals have an excess neutron. So Wallace claimed to get gravity shielding, you had to get a metal higher than copper, and bismuth qualifies, or mercury qualifies on the periodic table higher than copper. So when you spin them, you can orientate the neutrons within, the patents are 3626605, 3626606, and the best way to get to them is go to Rex. Are people familiar with Rex Research?
Yes.
No? Yeah. No, Rex Research has a neat page for Wallace. You type that in, and on the opening screen, you'll see the New Scientist. The first section is New Scientist, February 14th, 1980. February 14th, 1970 was the day the patent was issued. And the New Scientist did a 10th anniversary article in the magazine. And the main thing, it mentions all about the Wallace and so forth. And the epilogue says the military was very upset that this patent came into public domain. The patent was not assigned to General Electric. It's in Wallace's own name, Henry W. Wallace. And as I mentioned before, he was fired for his gravity modification work. And he didn't envision, people kept telling him, stop your research. The people at GE are going to fire you. And he laughed because I went back and I looked at the patents of Henry Wallace, and he was quite accomplished. He, back in the 70s, when the energy saving crisis was about, he did a lot of energy saving work. And I guess he made a lot of money for GE, and he was quite confident that his position with GE was secured. And then one day he had packed up his bag and he left. And he then went down to a scale company down in Schuberta, Mississippi. One of the scale companies. He worked there for a few years. Then he retired in Bradenton, Florida. He had a sailboat. He was well off, and then he died down there. And I guess he died down. We had a Thomas Townsend Brown. It was. I have to think. I have to think of what car did I drive. The Temple University Frontier Sciences under Nancy Calenda had a Thomas Townsend Brown symposium. They didn't have it at Temple. They had it at the Community College of Pennsylvania. And well, I won't get too far. I'm getting too far off the course here. Anyhow, when you get to metals that are heavier than copper, you get the extra neutron that can be mechanically spun polarized. I think when you look at the patents, you'll see a brass wheel. And I don't know how many people are familiar with air-driven gyroscope wheels.
Yes, I've seen them.
Yeah, you've seen them. Okay. Well, in his patent, if you look at his patent, you'll see a brass alloy, which qualified. And what he would do is, from the patent, based upon the patent, he was using an air-driven aircraft-style gyroscope. And his research, oddly enough, while he worked at GE Valley Forge Space Center, they moved everything down to, well, when I was in college, I interviewed at the Walnut Street facility of GE. It was they said it was an old bomb factory. It couldn't be a bomb factory in Center City. But anyhow.
Ron, are you talking about Walnut, Massachusetts?
Oh, no. This was Walnut Street, Philadelphia.
Oh, Walnut Street. Okay.
Yeah, Walnut, no, Waltham. No, it's Walnut Street, Walnut Street, near 30th Street Station. And what happened is they gave him a basement lab down there. And what he had basically that gyroscope that he would air spin up, and then he'd undulate it. He'd just move it a few degrees off the axis center. And across the room on the other side, I think he used the gallium arsenide detector crystal. That sound familiar? People familiar with gallium arsenide detectors? Well, anyhow, he had the gallium arsenide mounted inside of a Faraday cage, which I guess was probably aluminum screening of some kind. And whenever he would, I think it's probably in his patent, whenever he would undulate the high spinning brass rotor from the aircraft gyroscope, the gallium arsenide detector would vibrate. And so he called that his kinematic field, because by virtue of this field going through a Faraday cage, that's largely the crux of his patent. And also, I think he does plots on temperature and so forth. We're almost dealing with the minutiae here. And so anyhow, nobody really gave him the go up to get into scale to make something meaningful out of it. And also, if you look at the patent, you'll see he had the aircraft gyroscope. There's a yoke, and I think the yoke it makes no sense, because anyhow, I think the yoke was made out of steel. You'll see this huge, massive yoke. It's probably 30 times the size of the small gyroscope. Why the yoke was there, I have no idea. But he called it a kinematic field because it was not electromagnetic, and it was changing the crystal across the room at probably 20 feet or so. And they also, someone said they stopped the subways from running as to prevent any vibration that may have caused the, but anyhow, you could tell whenever they moved the gyroscope, the gallium arsenide would,
Ron, let me put you back on mute. I have a couple more questions. If that's okay.
Yeah.
Let me go to Jacob Helvey, who has been patiently waiting, and then Wayne after that.
Okay.
I know Paul wants to say something too.
Hey, thanks, Tim. Hey, Mark. Really, a question I had here regarding the craft there. I'm just wondering how it actually, if there's any evidence or reports that you have of it actually interacting with the air or atmosphere. What sort of aerodynamic drag effects are reported, right? Like any sort of heating while it's pulling these high acceleration maneuvers. So wondering if you comment on that a little bit, if at all.
Well, based on what I had been told in the film that was shown to the guests at this meeting, November 12th, 1988, at Norton Air Force Base. I'm sorry, at Lockheed Skunk Works up at Air Force Plant 42. There was no evidence of there being any kind of aerodynamic resistance at all. It was as though the system was not only demassing the vehicle, but a portion of the surrounding space-time, including the atmosphere. I've talked to eyewitnesses who've been dining at a restaurant on one of the bluffs in Laguna Beach, California, overlooking the ocean at night, and they've actually seen glowing objects accelerating and moving underneath the ocean offshore at tremendous velocities without any kind of wake being produced, without any kind of shock waves whatsoever, like the bow wake that you get off of a ship. These craft were apparently able to demass a portion of the surrounding water so that it basically be pushed aside without any inertia, without any interaction from, because of the mass of the water itself was being neutralized in such a way that the vehicle moving through the water and displacing the water was having no drag on the vehicle at all.
Would it be possible to be some sort of like a dampening effect? So maybe like
inertial dampening,
or just there might be some turbulent effects there, but it would be like minimized to where, like, from our perception, it would seem like it's not affecting the air or the water.
Well, I know that, for example, when you see an aircraft moving through the air at high velocity, you see supersonic shock waves and
turbulent wakes involved on the wingtips for sure.
Vortices and things like that. But from every account that I've been privy to, and from every event that I've personally witnessed, I have never seen any evidence of turbulence around the vehicle or in their wake. What I have seen, though, is ionization trails that follow behind them.
Okay.
When they move under a condition where the vehicle seems to be highly energized and is glowing brightly in the air. I couldn't tell you whether the glowing and the brightly was because the object itself was self-luminous or because it was putting such a tremendous charge on the surrounding air that the ionization was causing the production of stray photons that were producing the light that I saw. But I can tell you that when these things would move rapidly through the air under these energetic conditions, that they would leave a trail, a glowing trail of what appeared to be ionized air. So that's about the best I can do in terms of answering your question.
Okay, and then I guess there's no leftover, I don't know, effects or damaging of the hull itself, like scorch marks, maybe evidence of it entering the atmosphere or any of that sort.
Based on the description from the eyewitness, and I have more than one that have seen this thing up close enough to touch it, that there was no evidence of any kind of electrical scorching or any kind of ionizing damage done to the hull by the propulsion system.
Okay. And so, before we go to Wayne, Mark, I want to ask, how are you doing on time?
Are we really looking at only a half hour left in our session?
Yeah.
It's amazing that it's gone this fast. It's hard to believe.
Well, I want to thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for talking in depth. Actually, I've been worried because it's so in depth. I was like, I feel embarrassed. I feel like we're just interrogating you.
Don't feel embarrassed. No. I welcome the questions. I mean, if I don't know the answer, I will tell you.
Well, it's exciting. And it's exciting to have you informed with people who are building things too, right? And then again, Mark and and I mean, we've got 7 or 8 people here who are actively building things, and so so that's exciting.
It is. And I welcome. I would love to correspond with anyone who's actively participating in the construction of these devices, because I'm always interested to see what their outcome is with whatever they've come up with.
And actually, let me go to Mark really quick. He had a thing about bean spilling, and so Mark.
Yes, I was just wanted to say to Ron Kita that we really love you and you're helping out a lot, but we want you to keep topic to what we're talking about now, and you need like a 4-hour session, maybe even a 5-hour session to just spill everything in one shot. And don't spill all the beans now, because we want something to be excited about for next week. Okay.
Oh yeah.
And Ron is actually driving distance from us. I hope to get you down to the lab when everyone's together and running experiments.
Yeah.
Ron, you're muted.
Oh, was he?
Sorry. Yeah, Ron, you're muted. Unmute. We can't hear you.
2. Okay, you're gonna have to.
Okay. Well,
I just want to add, I'll make a quick interjection. I built a hell of a lot of stuff. I built a Mercury gyroscope.
Definitely want you in the lab.
Well, anyhow, I just want to make a comment. When you build a gyroscope, I took a zinc die-cast pulley. I put an insulator or a tape around the steel die-cast pulley, wrapped a strap around the outside. What I found out, you have to drive electric current right under a magnet to get it to work. If you don't drive it, this is a short thing. If you don't drive the electric current under a high-powered magnetic field, you won't get the spin. It does work. Then easy to build. That's it.
Okay.
Hey, Ron, we'll have you in the lab, and we'll work on that together. But questions for Mark McCandlish?
Well, yeah, and so we have Wayne, actually. We do have Wayne.
Yes, go ahead, Wayne.
Yeah, hi. So I just wanted to touch on that rotating metal. So I was just thinking about that, and I just want to submit that I don't believe it was mercury, but I think maybe something that seems more probable would be cesium. And the reason for that is cesium is a liquid at 28 degrees Celsius, and it also has 100% in abundance a spin. Let me look it up here. The nuclear spin is I think it was 7/2. I don't know. I could be wrong, but it was up there. So it has and it's also heavy too. Atomic number 55, I think it was. I was looking at it a few minutes ago. So it's a heavy liquid metal, and it has the high nuclear spin. In contrast to mercury, which does have like its isotope is
just below uranium, isn't it?
13%.
Atomic table.
Mercury is a little hard to see here. Just give me a moment.
It's like 199 or something.
Mercury 199 has a 1/2 nuclear spin, but it's only about 17% in abundance. So most of the mercury is spin neutral, which means just mass, right? So by spinning it rapidly, the nuclei are not going to polarize. So if that is the mechanism in which this mass cancellation effect happens, where the nuclei are polarizing or aligning on one axis or plane, then I don't think mercury would be a very good candidate. So
interesting. Yeah. Great observation. Say, listen, just let me interject before we run out of time that I would love to correspond with any and all of the people that are in on this conference here. That includes you, Wayne, and Ron especially, and David. Oh, David Mathis. Hi.
How you doing?
Yeah. Nice to see you.
Mark, if you want to converse with us in real time as we're doing the experiments, you need to download the WhatsApp app on your phone and give me your phone number and we can add you. We have a chat group that literally goes 24/7 of actual engineerable ideas. And we try to keep it to just that topic, engineering ideas that are happening right now, a soldering problem, something you're working on, all different problems we're sharing worldwide. And that's the place you want to be. So make sure to get the WhatsApp app on your phone if you don't already have it.
Yeah, okay. And then I think also, Mark, I believe everyone on this list has your email, but if you want to give that out, although, we are, and in fact, I should mention this now. So we're looking at putting this up online. Is everyone here okay with that?
Sure. Yeah, I am. Okay. I am. Yeah. I haven't named any names in terms of the abductees. And Yeah, I try to be real careful about that these days. But yeah, I have no problem with putting up my.
I think what's really important about the abductee cases is whether we can trust her and whether what she saw about the engineerable side of the craft is valid, and if there's any theory that we can attribute it to and try out in the lab and order that equipment. That's like the focus of APEC conference.
Well, let me just interject.
Engineering underlined.
Let me just interject, Mark, that one of the reasons that I found that particular case so compelling was the fact that in order to sort of prevent any cross-pollination information-wise between what I had to say about the structure of the ARV, how it was put together, how it worked, and so forth, I didn't share any of that information publicly prior to this young lady describing the components in the craft that she saw. I had never been on the air or talked publicly to anyone on a radio program or anything about the ARV when I heard from within the UFO community that there had been this group of abductees, and this was one of the first people that I talked to before I ever went public. So she was describing components that had a lot of commonality with the things that I had seen in the ARV, but she had no idea what I had to say. She was basically just talking in the blind about her experience, and I was seeing, you know, a common thread between the components that I was familiar with from the ARV and the things that she was describing from the craft that she had been taken up in.
Right, and I think where we're going with this is that there's many different theories to, you know, on a fundamental physics level to explain what's going on over here. And there's there's some that are, you know, very difficult to replicate, and some that are a lot easier to replicate, just haven't been tried yet. So we're really trying to focus on the ones that are most easy to replicate. And Alzafon's explanation is actually a little bit more intricate than it, but he, according to his dad, it is possible to get this effect with a spinning component. So his is more like the solid state way of creating dynamic nuclear orientation. And what was going on in the ARV is sort of the Model T of flying saucers, where you have spinning components, because you really don't want spinning components in a craft. Because if you're spinning it one way, you're going to have something to counter rotate. Otherwise, everyone's going to get dizzy. And we do know flying saucers spin a bit. And David has an explanation as to why that happens. But so it's kind of like hard to remove the spin, but you don't want something spinning, you know, at 10,000 RPM, a big metal disc in the center, because that's going to create a lot of trouble for you. Let me give you my entire idea of what is going on over here. And this is based off of not people telling me or whispering in my ear, just looking at the different theories that could explain what is going on. First of all, as a power source, these are the power source. They're hydrogen and oxygen, and they are powering a hydrogen fuel cell. Why a hydrogen fuel cell? Well, first of all, that was available at the time, and that's what they used on the space shuttle. The byproduct of oxygen and hydrogen is water. Now, what can you do with the water? You can make a tube around the outside somewhere and spin it around as a spin ballast for the craft, because that center column disc over there spinning one way, you don't want to spin the other way. So you have to have a spin ballast of the water, which is the refuse from the device anyway. So it's a double combination over there. And then in the center core, what you have is a aluminum flywheel spinning around an electromagnetic coil. So there's a strong magnetic field created. And by spinning the disc in the center of it, you're bringing about dynamic nuclear orientation, which then affects the rest of the craft, making the craft close to weightless. It never really achieves 100%, or maybe it does, I don't know. The problem is that when it's close to the ground, when it's sitting on the ground, it will also orient the ground, the earth too. So it's much harder to achieve full weightlessness. That's why these craft normally land on pedestals and stuff, so that the dynamic nuclear orientation effect doesn't have to go into the ground, and they can achieve it much faster. And then when they're at like 98% weight loss, they start pulsing these capacitor plates all in unison to get up even higher, achieve full dynamic nuclear orientation, at which point they're able to shoot off at crazy speeds because they're almost weightless, and they're using the pulse capacitor plates to control and maneuver the craft.
Now, Mark, if I could jump in real quick, I noticed Chris Lumen has patiently had his hand up. I didn't see him. Chris, let me ask you to unmute real quick if I can.
All right. Yeah, thanks for giving me that time because I just finished the entire thing.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Really great presentation. Couple questions. You said so there's that mercury stuff in the center of the craft. There was also a klystron in the ARV, right? You said, is that true?
Well, I said that I thought that the central column functioned like a klystron tube.
Okay.
And Jeremiah had come on and had indicated that he was, as I understood it, in agreement with that, although the klystron that he held up to show as an example and describe the high voltages that it achieved had a lot of internal components that were not in evidence in the original description of that central column and its function supposedly as a klystron.
Okay, so you're thinking that the microwave device, the mercury device itself was functioning as a klystron.
I'm only suggesting that's one possibility. I don't know for a fact that that's true.
Okay,
Oh,
and then the last, yes.
Let me just add something about that. A klystron and a thyratron are two separate things. A klystron uses hydrogen gas as its carrier, and the hydrogen is better for faster impulses because of the cascading effect in hydrogen. Mercury vapor is actually called the thyratron, which doesn't have as high of an impulse capacity. All you would need in order to create this circuit inside the center column is three main components. You have the thermionic emitter, which emits the electrons into the column, and that needs to be powered by probably the DC batteries. That would have been a good source for that heating coil. And then there's a charge plate, or they call it a grid, and you charge that to negative 300 volts or so. And then on the other side is the anode. So when the charge plate is charged to negative, about 200, 300 volts, it stops the thermionic emission from traveling through the tube. As soon as you shut off that voltage, then if there is a high voltage potential between the cathode and the anode, the electrons have this cascading effect either through the hydrogen or through the vapor mercury. You could do it both ways with both gases. There's other gases you can do this with as well, and they have different names for them. So that's the key. It's basically a massive switch, a high voltage switch.
Okay.
And you need.
I think Chris had one more question, right? Chris?
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chris. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah. So I think you also might have mentioned that the hull, the composite material that was made of, might have had metal pieces embedded in it. It looked like.
He described the exterior as being covered with what he called a goopy lead paint that looked like it had thousands and thousands of flecks of little tiny pieces of metal in a resin type material that was on the surface on the outside of the craft. Kind of like an old-fashioned 1960s metal flake paint job. And I mean a real metal flake paint job where you can see the individual flecks quite clearly. That's the way he described it.
And so like the whole outside seemed to be covered in that?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Paul's got his hands up.
Oh, does he? Okay.
Yeah, Paul's been wanting to say something for a while.
But for the electronica guys that like delivering pieces of hardware, here's a gyroscope for an anti-tank rocket, a gyroscope for a B-52, and an SRB on a space shuttle. So that's just to let you guys know that we have some other hardware around here. Now, going back to this thing about the flywheel, what if it was a superconductor? Now, the thing about mercury is could be superconducting material also.
Well, that was one of the things that we had given some consideration to, that maybe the flywheel was even hollow and had some kind of liquid inside of it.
Yeah.
And that liquid was helping with the generation of power because of the metal flywheel moving at a higher velocity than the liquid inside, creating turbulence patterns in there that might add to the effect of generating electricity. I don't know if that makes sense, but that was one of the things we speculated about.
What about, I would suspect mercury are probably better than a ferromagnetic fluid. Would you agree with that?
Well, as far as the central column was concerned, I know that the witness said that in hearing the description of the components, that the central column was described as being filled with a noble gas, and the gas was mercury. That was very specific in terms of what he was told at the time that he had his was in this conference with a number of other people that were brought up from Norton Air Force Base to Area 51 or Plant 42.
What if it was doped by barium titanate?
Well, you know, I've heard that. I don't know that that's true. I understand that might have had the ability to augment the performance of the system, although I don't know that that particular material was available with the technology that was used to construct the vehicle in the 1960s. That's kind of the point that I have to keep going back to, is the fact that the thing was built in the 1960s. There were much more advanced systems that came out of Lockheed subsequent to that, but that this, as one of the other participants described earlier, was really basically just a Model T design for the basic concept of the propulsion system.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm amazed that you got all those components sitting around your office.
That's what happens when you have a 60 years of career.
Yeah, that's great. So David, I noticed that David has joined us, and we've had a number of interesting conversations via email. I wondered if David had anything that he wanted to contribute.
David, you're muted. You have to unmute yourself.
All right, I'm unmuted. We have lawnmowers in the background.
Oh, I think we were talking about two different Davids. Mark, which David were you talking about?
David Mathis, yeah, the one who was just talking.
Because David Alzafon had a question too. Okay.
Yeah, we're running low on time, so we got to make it quick.
Mark, what was your question?
Well, I just thought perhaps you had something to say, because I mean, you've had some interesting comments to make over the last year or two in the group conversations.
I think there's, when I look at the ARV, I see something different. I see the homopolar generator. That's pretty obvious, I think. I agree with Mark that you have to look at dual uses. You don't build a craft like that without multiple uses. And all those components, I look at the tanks at the bottom. I wonder why they're sealed. Maybe it's a gas, but I don't know. Maybe it's coils in a gas or a fluid, or and it's 60s technology. We're 60 years later. So my challenge to you, Mark, is what would a 2020 vehicle look like if we just shrank everything and added technology that we know now?
Well, I can tell you what they look like because I've seen one hovering right near my house. This was in 2012, 9th of July, about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. It would be literally a lens-shaped disc with a slight bulge on the dorsal surface in the middle, black, jet black. It has a recessed area in the bottom of the vehicle, up inside of which there appears to be a pattern of hexagonal plates that, when they're energized, actually glow different colors, going from magenta to orange to red to, from magenta to red, orange, yellow, and then to white, and then a bluish white with kind of a sort of a corona around them. This particular vehicle appeared to be having some kind of flight control problems, because you could see that the different panels were fluttering and glowing different colors. It seemed obvious that this vehicle was having trouble controlling the voltages were going to these panels. And I got my girlfriend on the cell phone. I said, go outside, go in your driveway, look to the west, you're going to see a UFO. It's, because she doesn't believe any of this stuff. And I said, this is your chance. And no sooner had they said that, this thing, the panels all went white and it was gone. just like that. I mean, just out of sight, like it had been fired out of a gun.
Mark, let me share my screen really quick. I have another one of your illustrations here. Now, is this what you talk about? Is this the modern device you're describing?
No, that's the Aurora Pulsar.
Okay.
That's the thing that was flying over Southern California at Mach 5 back in the 1990s. The problem.
Here's another.
Ben Rich was actually quite upset about this illustration. In fact, I had a contact tell me recently that he actually tried to put out a hit on me for publishing that. But the particular drawing that you had up there has disappeared from the screen now. But the thing that was actually in error with that particular drawing was, you see the Nakaduck shaped inlets on the front end there?
Yeah.
Those were actually almost side by side with a little bit of a slight stagger, with the one closer to the center line on each side a little bit further in lead, but they were further back, almost to the point where you're at the beginning of that slight ridge that rises up in the middle of the section there. Those little dots that run across the widest part, those are actually little like fuel injectors that are spraying fuel outwards. And what would happen is once the 4 internal engines, there were 8 Nakaducks in the front, 4 on the top and 4 on the bottom, all of which allowed air into the engines that were internal. There were 4 internal high bypass turbojet engines, and these Nakaducks were like trapdoors that would close off so they were flush. The whole thing was covered with space shuttle tiles. But once it got up to something approaching Mach 1 or Mach 2, those Nakaducks could close, including the exhaust ports on the back end, and it would begin spraying fuel from those little injectors on the trailing edge of that ridge that runs across the widest part of the vehicle. And that fuel, when it was introduced into the airstream, would spontaneously combust, and it would expand between the tapered afterbody and the supersonic shock wave that would separate. There would be a wake separation that would occur right at the crest of that slight ridge in the center of the vehicle, both on top and the bottom. And this essentially was a very rudimentary sort of, what would they call it, a linear aerospike type engine, except that more or less flattened out to accommodate the shape of the fuselage.
Well, let me stop sharing then. And actually, it looks like Chris has another question. So, and Chris, you're not muted, so go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I should have muted myself before. This is actually a question for David Elzafan. For the spinning, for the nuclear orientation to happen from the spinning aluminum disc, would that disc have to be spinning at like a relativistic speed or not?
No, it wouldn't.
Okay.
The idea is to induce a state where all the electrons are precessing around their axis at the Larmor frequency, and then put a microwave generator at one side of the disk, say in a small area, so that as they pass, they're flipped over. They then induce dynamic nuclear orientation in the aluminum atoms. And then as the disk goes around to another joining up with that microwave field, the order-disorder transformation takes place. They're oriented, then the Earth's gravitational field disorients the virtual processes that surround them, and then they're reoriented as they go around the disk by the magnetic field, the constant magnetic field, the electrons. And then they hit the microwave field and the electrons are flipped. That flips the nuclei, and you have this cycle repeating over and over again.
So a portion of that disk is being illuminated by microwaves.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
That's
Okay.
right. And the purpose of that is to make the electrons flip.
Yeah.
And then the disk supplies the interval, the time interval between flipping the electrons.
And so I think we're just about out of time for Mark. So let's go back to Mark. At the very least, I think we should all give Mark a very big thank you, a giant thank you for his time today. So
Oh, you're welcome.
Mark, thank you very much, sir.
Everybody. You know, I can hang out a little bit longer if you like. If anybody has any last minute questions, I don't have to be to work until an hour from now. So
okay.
Just one last minute comment. One last minute comment is we would absolutely love to try and replicate just about anything that you can present. If you can give more information about how it might be done or other theories with the people that you're already working with, you know, we also can contribute our own. So if you want to sort of team us up with who you're already working with and we can all join efforts together and start to work on this, we are very interested in doing exactly that. And that's been sort of our modus operandi the entire time, is to join efforts and link up so we can do this stuff together.
I'd love to do that.
You mentioned there's somebody in Princeton who's working on this. Princeton's a half an hour from here. He can totally come help us in the lab, and we can share equipment and, you know, do this in the most professional, open fashion. We plan on continuing these conferences in this format. When Jeremiah comes down here and when Wayne comes down here, Jeremy, everyone's down here, we're going to be doing this conference, and there's going to be several different views on experiments. We could log into Zoom from several different angles. I could have it on my cell phone. You could have it on, you know, from several different angles. You could see the scale measurements on one computer, and we can really do this in a scientific fashion with everyone watching. And that's what I'm hoping to take APEC to, that level where you can actually see an experiment happening live. One of the big problems in this field is that somebody would do an experiment. Later, they would write up the paper, then they would publish it. 2 years later, somebody reads it and thinks of a reason why they did it wrong or how they could have done it better. And then he gets back to them. And by that time, it's totally irrelevant information, because you're talking about an experiment I did 2 years ago. That equipment's all put away. I'm not setting it up again. But if we have all these people in the group watching the experiment live, the recommendation can be changed in a, you know, snip of a button, a turn of a knob.
That's a great idea. Yeah, I like that.
And really like the timing, having everyone on Zoom and, you know, Zoom buckies, it works out amazing for everybody, and the timing couldn't have been better, literally.
Well, yeah, because we're all trapped in our houses, right? So yeah, that does help. It's a captive audience. But yes, Mark, I genuinely cannot thank you enough. I appreciate your time and sharing so much and so much depth as well. You know, it's just wonderful. So,
well, you're all very welcome. I was happy to spend the time with you. I'm just sorry we didn't have more time, because I'm sure that there are a lot more questions out there and a lot more contributions that could be made besides my own. So, you know, I can't take credit for this, but I really love participating, and I look forward to the next time we can do this.
Well, thank you again.
Just one thing, Mark, you mentioned that you work in a shelter.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, yeah, I just rescued a dog from India over here. Her name is Pinky, and her spay cut is it got infected, and they gave me some antibiotics and stuff. Are you familiar with situations like this? What to do?
Well, you want to try and keep the wound as clean as you can, as long as you can. Sometimes keeping a bandage is not always a good idea. You know, you have to try and keep the dog from licking the wound as much as you can. Sometimes putting a Victorian collar on dog will prevent that, so they don't chew or, you know, lick the incision site. So that helps you to keep it clean without having it covered up and bandaged, which will help to accelerate the healing.
Okay, I was thinking also of using like an antibiotic on a base layer covered with the spray that I got that you put on cables and stuff so that they don't chew it. So if you spray it over there, she won't want to lick it. That's what I was thinking.
Well, you know, I don't know if using chemicals of that kind is a good idea topically. You might want to try and get something like that or something
on top of the antibiotic.
Well, there again, boy, that's not something I have any familiarity with. I wouldn't do it. Topical antibiotics, yes, but spraying stuff over the top of it, you know, I have a concern that it might change the chemical structure of the antibiotic in some way. You know, that's not good.
Okay.
So, but I would suggest going with a collar so she can't mess with the site of the surgery.
Is that what you do as, is this your main job right now, working with the shelter, or is it just a side hobby?
But my girlfriend has a facility out in Palisadro. It's about 7 miles east of Reading, and we have about 100 cats out there. We have these chain link dog kennels that we put tarps over, and then we put galvanized steel roofs over them to make them weatherproof. We have these plywood cubbies that we've built into a number of these things, and they're all connected by tunnels that I constructed out of PVC irrigation tubing and chicken wire that I wrapped around the tunnels, and then just used wire ties to fasten it into place, and then we just wire everything together so they can run from
like
one
a big
enclosure to the
house
next.
for cats.
Yeah, it's like a big cat. There's like 6 enclosures on the west side, and then we have a big sunroom in the middle where we took what amounted to the structure for an aviary. We laid down a 1 by 1 foot square concrete pavers, 15 by 25 feet, and then we covered the whole thing with chain link and chicken wire, and the kitties can run in there and chase each other around and play and stuff, and litter boxes, every so often, every here and there, and of course food, and then in the wintertime we can hang a sheet in front of the plywood cubby, and we put a light bulb in there, and it keeps them nice and warm when it gets down to freezing and stuff, and so it works out pretty well for them.
Okay, Jeremy wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, I got a question from Victor Wag in the live chat, who gave us a super chat, and he asked what Mark thought of the Salpace patents, if they were from the U.S. Navy, those recent patents that came out, and there's a Drive article saying that those patents were granted and pushed through because of threats of the Chinese technology, and that the Chinese might be developing something else. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Mark, but
I have seen the patents. I've seen the patent drawings. The claims that are being made there seem legitimate. The drawings that went with them, though, they didn't make sense to me in terms of what was being described in the text. So that was the problem that I had with them. But in terms of whether or not they should have been issued as patents because the Chinese were working on something, I thought that was kind of questionable, because we have the patents that were mentioned earlier by I think it was I forget now who mentioned it. It might have been David who mentioned the Hank Wallace patents and other patents that were issued back in the 60s and 70s, which I think were just as valid as anything as the more recent patents that you're talking about.
What's interesting about those recent patents is that there are so many diverse fields that were published. Like it's one physicist couldn't possibly have been studying, like quartz, piezoelectric superconductor materials that are, room temperature superconductors, and this fusion reactor, and this other thing that looks a lot like that Tic Tac UFO craft. It seems to me like a lot of that could have been technology that the Navy patents stuff through, that they get through espionage or through other, kind of intelligence collecting methods, where they basically scoop these ideas from other people and then publish it and patent it under their own patents. So, and I've also noticed that there's a consistent theme of changing around certain details within the patent to make the patent useless or harder to reproduce to protect intellectual property and also trade secrets and stuff. So there may have been some of that where certain things were switched out on purpose to make, so it didn't make sense, especially with the drawings that you alluded to.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the Tic Tac comment that you made. It was something I had hoped it would come up earlier. I just want to tell you that in my personal opinion, the Tic Tacs are man-built, they're man-made, they're ours. And I say this because I have a friend who drives a semi-truck between Redding, California and Sacramento on a nightly basis during the week. And he passes within probably 15, 20 miles of Beale Air Force Base, which is where the SR-71 used to fly out of. And he has had close encounters, and I mean less than 15 feet away from these Tic Tac objects. He's seen canopy windows, he's seen instrumentation inside, he's seen head-up displays when they were hovering below the freeway level, where the freeway was elevated to go up over the Sacramento River. And he's looked down and been able to see these things hovering in a field and look into a cockpit and see instrumentation and keeping consistent with what you would expect to find in a modern man-made aircraft. So I'm convinced, based on his testimony, that these things are probably ours, and they're probably operating out of Beale Air Force Base. But he's been close enough that he could throw a rock and hit one. So, for what it's worth.
Did you say that there was a mercury vapor used in this craft, or?
That was in the central column. Yeah, that was what was described: a noble gas, a mercury vapor.
Yeah, because if you look up fluorescent tubes, that mercury vapor has this avalanche effect, which is regarded as like a negative resistance. I kind of look at it as a source of negative energy, which I think would be useful for reducing the mass of this craft. So yeah, the mercury vapor I think is a critical element.
I share your belief.
Okay. Very good. Okay, yeah, that's all that I had.
Thank you.